Welcome everyone to our June 2021 HEDNA at Home. The HEDNA at Home team has put together another amazing agenda to close out our HEDNA at Home series. This is our fourth and final virtual conference as the team directs our attention on the upcoming face-to-face conference in Miami. We have nearly 300 registered attendees today, and with all of our virtual conferences, both members and non-members can view the entire conference on YouTube. My name is Audrey Moranti, and I work for Sabre, and I will serve as your host of today's event. As we did during our three previous conferences, we'll hear from industry leaders and experts on the state of the industry and how we prepare as travel comes roaring back. We will focus more on the future and how we prepare to greet our customers and meet their demands. Our keynote session and our two of our three panel sessions, will take a few questions at the end of each of their sessions today. You can submit questions by selecting the Q&A button on the bottom of your screen. So let's get started. It's with great pleasure that again, I get to introduce Sebastian Littner, Vice President of Partnerships at Cloudbed and the President of HEDNA to officially launch the Spring HEDNA at Home Conference. Thank you, Sebastian.
Thank you, Audrey, and thank you for the introduction. I will do the obvious, can you see my screen, introduction to my session, but it's a pleasure for me to welcome you officially as President of HEDNA to to June's HEDNA at Home event. And thank you, Audrey, and the entire conference team for putting together this last virtual conference. A shout out goes to Ewald, our association management company, supporting us in making this production flawless. I have two objectives today. I want to provide you with critical updates around HEDNA, the organization, its strategy, membership, but also get you excited about upcoming in-person events HEDNA will be hosting in the rest of this year and in early 2022. So let's get started. It's with great pleasure that I introduce you to Ben Thomas. We have a new board member. He assumes the board seat that was occupied by Ludo from Shangri-La. Ben Thomas is the Chief Commercial Officer at Penta Hotels. Ben brings a wealth of experience in hospitality to HEDNA. He has a solid general manager background working at Millennium Copthorne, Village Hotels, and Penta Hotels. I look very much forward working with him. We've also been able to grow our membership. We welcome the following new members: Hotel Furniture, Uplift, Checkout, Keynote, Sky, and of course, Penta Hotels worldwide. As a reminder, hotel memberships grant you whole company access, meaning all your employees have direct access to all publications, webinar recordings, exclusive conference pricing, and all benefits are, as always, available for you to view and access under hedna.org/membership. Now, what does HEDNA do? And more importantly, what should we do? In Q4 of last year, our board of directors met virtually to discuss HEDNA's strategy. And we came up after a very productive session with these four strategic pillars: content distribution, led by Nadine Pagel; connectivity, led by Natalie Kimball; revenue optimization, led by Chinmay Sharma; payments, led by Mark Carlo and Sandra Sari. All of these strategic pillars are very nicely defined. There's objectives, there are deliverables defined in each of these pillars. And if you want to learn more, /get involved outlines all of these strategic pillars. And to introduce to our membership and our non-members these specific strategic pillars, we decided to dedicate an entire conference, this one, to HEDNA strategic pillars. So all the content that you will hear about today nicely aligns with all of these strategic pillars. Now, hopefully, this will be our last virtual conference. The team is working very hard to prepare our actual in-person conference. Let me introduce you to HEDNA Miami, our global distribution conference. Registration is now open. It is happening in Miami, Florida on October 11th and October 12th. I look forward to welcoming you there, catching up with you, having an in-person conversation, one thing that I've missed for a long time, and I'm sure a lot of you have as well. Now, from the heat of Miami, 3 months later, we will be going to probably the snowy, but still very, very charming Vienna, Austria. I hear in January, the ski hills around Vienna are still open for our European Global Distribution Conference that is based out of Vienna, Austria on January 31st and February 2nd. We've also launched a brand new application. It is available in both Android and Apple. It's called HEDNA 365. It is live for you to download. And what gets me really excited about it is it also powers the member-only section of our website. If you don't want to download yet another application on your device, it works on any browser, it works on any device. You can log in from your computer, from your laptop, and it provides you access to all information that HEDNA has to offer. It also permits you to catch up with pillar owners, read their material, their publications. It allows you to have a conversation directly with other members and consult with them around the challenges and opportunities that you're facing. Now, let's go back to one of these strategic pillars, revenue optimization. You can't optimize revenue without knowing what's going on. And we will kick off HEDNA at Home with a fireside chat between Cindy Estes Green and Chinmay Sharma, who will talk about recent trends and the need for a new commercial strategy around disruption and recovery. Their chat will cover changing market segments and distribution channels during the current recovery and how we can adopt to a new normal. Until then, I will leave you with a very clear call to action. I want to see you in Miami, in Florida, on October 11th and 12th, and catch up with you over drinks or coffee or water, it doesn't matter. And with that, Audrey, I want to turn it back to you. Let's continue with the program. Enjoy the show.
Thank you, Sebastian, and welcome back, everyone. Sebastian, you're buying me a drink. That's all I have to say. So as Sebastian had mentioned, Chinmay Sharma and Cindy Estes Green will be doing a fireside chat. Cindy Estes Green is the CEO and co-founder of Calibra Labs, which is a benchmarking and analytics company with a very robust hotel database and uses data science techniques to evaluate and predict hotel revenue performance. Cindy is a thought leader and a frequent speaker on the hospitality distribution and commercial strategy, having written many books and studies on the topic that explain and anticipate how digital disruption will impact the economics of hotels. Cindy's held senior operational and corporate roles and is the founder and leader of 2 successful data analytics companies. So we're very thrilled to have Cindy joining us today. Chinmay is currently president of Americas for RateGain, which is a technology provider of SaaS products, helping travel and hospitality companies. He's previously worked in leadership roles at companies like Taj Hotels, Starwood Capital Group, Wyndham, and Expedia. And Chinmay also joins us and is a current board member at HEDNA. So Chinmay, I will hand it over to you, and thank you and welcome to you both.
Thank you, Audrey. Good morning, Cindy. Good to see you.
Good morning, Chinmay. Great to be here. Thank you for having me.
Yes, absolutely. So we have about 30 minutes, and like Sebastian mentioned, we'll discuss some trends about our favorite industry, and more importantly, focus on the path ahead and how the hospitality industry can get ready for this recovery, which is definitely unlike anything we've seen before. So the good news is that according to all the data that we see, as well as what we read in the industry, the latest industry trends, both in travel search and bookings, especially average rates for leisure markets and TSA passenger volume, etc., they're all pointing in the right direction. I think it'll be good from your vantage point to just hear what's the latest in the industry. Can we call it a recovery, which is going to be a U shape or a V shape? And that data will just set the context for our chat. So we can discuss, trends in occupancy area or how the chain scales are doing. And then I think Calibri Labs has access to some really cool data also about purpose of visit and commercial and leisure, which, at least I haven't seen before. So if I can request you to set the context, and then we can jump into some Q&A. And I'm happy to pick up any questions from the audience as well. So Cindy, over to you.
Thank you. I'll just get live here. So I'm going to just kind of race through some high-level stats just to set the stage for the discussion. Everything that I'm going to talk about is right now is US only, the data that I'm going to share today. But I know a lot of the patterns are similar. The timing may be somewhat different in other parts of the world. But so what we're looking at here is the blue line is occupancy and the red line is average rate. That line demarcation is January 1st, 2021. So we see from January of 2020, the big dip in March and April when COVID hit, and then the transition to recovery the beginning of this year, which was rather flat the first couple of months. And we're now moving to a growth period. And I'd say March and April is when it started up. And the good news is the average rates, which is that red line, are getting awfully close to, you can see the line, which is 2019 actual. So everything we're looking at in a lot of our data, we compare to 2019. So the rates are getting close and occupancy is starting to tick up. But there are definitely some differences. And, just to look at this chart, occupancy, average rate, and RevPAR, the gray line is 2019. The red line is 2020. The blue line is where we're headed. And you could see again, we are creeping closer to that 2019. But the biggest thing is the volume is not there yet. So our occupancies, there's still a sizable gap to where we were in 2019 levels. Just to kind of break it down a little bit by rate category, the rate categories I would, that really have any activity to speak of are rack bar, which is the pink line, OTA is the red one, and the green line is promotion or loyalty rates. So for the branded properties, it's the loyalty member rate programs, not redemption. I just mean loyalty bookings, and any direct promotions, whether it's connected to the loyalty programs or not. And that's where we've seen most of the growth. You can see about 15% of the demand came from the loyalty or the promotion, direct promotion activity. The OTAs are closer to about 20%. We had a bit of an uptick in the US because of Memorial Day weekend. We always see that when we look week by week at holiday periods. Rack bar is still approximately 25% of the demand. Group is well below 10%, which is unusual. It's normally across the whole US closer to between 15 and 18% when we include economy and kind of the lower tier hotels. So the thing that's interesting when you look at chain scales is the upper upscale, and upper mid-scale properties. The loyalty member rate and the OTA demand share has been neck and neck. So across the US, luxury, economy, and mid-scale, there's a sizable difference with OTA, but for everybody else, it's really been neck and neck, and that's where most of the business is happening right now. Not surprising because we have so much focus on leisure. So the biggest thing, as Chinmay already referenced, is corporate and group, or commercial, as we call it. It isn't just corporate; it's a lot of segments, consortia, and others that are commercially driven, including government. So that's the business that dropped off with COVID, and that's the business we're all waiting to come back. And what we wanted to do was kind of track that and be able to look at it as a ratio. So we developed a commercial leisure index or ratio, which this is the first time it's being shown. We just developed this, so you're the first audience for it, which is exciting. We wanted to track back to 2015 and start seeing what the dependence on commercial versus leisure businesses. And we have mapped all of the different rate categories. If you're wondering how we defined it, it isn't just corporate, because a lot of the corporate business, as those, especially in HEDNA, are aware, doesn't always come through the traditional kind of GDS travel agent channel. So we have many rate categories that are commercially driven that we aggregated, and then those that are leisure driven. And we also split group into commercial and leisure. So, and I won't get into what those mappings are, but you can see there's definitely Q1 every year is much stronger on commercial. Q3, which includes the summer, tends to be stronger on leisure. But just to give you an idea, from 2015 to 2019, the ratio has been, if they're equal, we'll call it 100. So if commercial is slightly higher, in 2015, commercial had an index of 105. It's been steadily dropping, where by 2019, commercial was actually at 100. So an exactly equal between commercial and leisure. But by market, there are huge differences. About half of the 334 markets that make up the US market were over 100. So you could imagine a lot of the large metro areas are much more dependent on commercial, which is why we had the big fall off during COVID. So the other thing we were doing, this is growth rates. So the blue line shows, and it's a rolling 3 months, and we indexed everything against the 2015 levels. And when we look at leisure growth, which is the blue line, it's been growing much faster than the red line, which is commercial growth. Commercial's been growing gradually, but leisure has definitely taken the lead in terms of overall demand for the US. You can also see with the COVID drop and then the recovery, obviously leisure is growing much faster than commercial at the moment. And we're going to keep tracking this. This is through May. We'll keep tracking this week by week and month by month. So just looking at overall stats, 2019 RevPAR was about $87. 2020, we dropped to about $42. So that was a 52% drop off. Our forecast for 2021 is for us to get back to closer to $57, which sounds awful when you're used to 87, but it's a huge improvement over where we were in 2020. We expect 22 to be somewhere in 70 to 73 perhaps. But to get back to 87, we think it's going to be 2023 or 2024 before the industry sees the RevPAR back to the position we were in 2019. A lot of that is because the corporate and group or the commercial business really dropped off, and the pace at which it returns will determine how well we can kind of get back to where we were. Just looking at it by chain scale, the blue bar is the RevPAR index compared to 2019. Looking at 2020 performance. So economy was at a 79% of what they did in 2019. And if you go down to upper upscale, 2020 upper upscale hotels were only about 33% of the level they were at 2019. So you can see by chain scale from top to bottom, the economy, the lower tier hotels performed better, but even at economy hotels were still only 80% of 2019. The forecast, which is the orange bar for 21, has economy at 93% of 2019. So very close to recovery. Upper upscale and luxury at the upper tier, closer to 50% of 2019 levels. So as you go down the chain scales, the performance recovery will make a big difference. And a lot of that, again, is the commercial business that went away that we're waiting to come back. So I'll just stop there and turn back over to Chinmay for questions. I just wanted to give a few stats to share just to set the stage for where we've been and where we think we're going.
That was great, Cindy. Thank you. So a couple of quick thoughts. I mean, the data was pretty interesting. Would you say that the industry did a better job in this downturn, especially regarding average rates? I mean, it seemed from one of the charts that the drop wasn't that significant. Maybe it was also driven by zero demand, but any thoughts, like, are we doing a better job overall over the years?
It does look like rates are, I mean, it's a lot of the rates were driven by the mix of business and that commercial gap where we had the corporate business and we had group that tended to bring the rates up. In the absence of that, the overall rates you would think would be lower. the rates are lower, but not as bad as I would have expected. And, a lot depends on when that corporate and group comes back, at what rate will it come back? And, RFP season is upon us and the corporate accounts are very aggressive. So it's hard to tell what that will look like.
Yeah, that's true. And I mean, talking about corporate accounts and also about, you showed us that index, which is, I think, a really cool way to look at business. So looks like leisure is over penetrating or performing really well, dominating. What are your thoughts about recovery for corporate transient and groups? Is it in the next 3 to 6 months, or is this financial year like completely wiped out? Any forecast?
Yeah, I don't expect a lot of the larger corporate accounts really cut back on budgets, and I think it's going to be hard for them to justify travel. I mean, as most people have recognized, anyone who has client-facing activities, whether they're in sales or account management, are much more likely to get out on the road first. But we've never really segmented the corporate business in the way we have to now, which is, that intercompany travel, where it's, someone in the San Francisco office flying to Chicago to meet with their colleagues. A lot of that is going to be a higher bar to justify. And I think that's going to be tough. But the need for team building may actually grow. And there's a thesis that getting the teams together, because people will be more remote, there's going to be more of this kind of hybrid model, that hotels can benefit by having offices may be smaller, there may be fewer places to meet. Hotels may be a good venue to have those kind of activities. And I think that those kind of, getting some of that business back, it's going to be different. But I think intercompany travel, a portion of it will go away, but the economy will grow. And I think it will kind of compensate for that. So as far as group goes, obviously there's definitely the beginnings of group business, and certainly the more leisure focused business is already coming back. I think smaller groups will start to come back. I attended the Hunter conference last month with 1,100 people, and there were all kinds of rules in place about health checks, and CLEAR ran like how to have your temperature taken and all that stuff, but it worked, and no one got sick, and that was a month ago. So I think people will get more confidence. I just think that the larger corporate accounts that run meetings and the larger associations have been hesitant because they kept delaying everything because of restrictions in certain locations. So I think it'll just be a slower ramp up. And I think in 22, we'll start seeing much more of it. And I think by 23, we'll be in full swing with the group side of things. But it's just a matter of the larger meetings having longer lead time because of planning.
Yeah, no, that's helpful. So within the transient segment, looks like leisure transient will overpower corporate transient, might take some time because of the points you mentioned, especially intercompany travel, I think will be under pressure. What about groups, like between leisure and corporate groups? If I'm a general manager, where should I put my money?
Well, I mean, I think that there has to be relationship building and all of the activity, the sales activity pursuing the corporate accounts. I think that we may get more group business out of corporate accounts because of things like team building and other activities to get everybody back together. We may actually have a kind of spike in that business because we've been, it'll be 2 years that people haven't seen each other. And I think everybody realizes they need to get their teams back and have, activities to kind of jumpstart the business again. So I think that it's not a matter of just picking, but the other thing that's really important, and I didn't show the market by market detail, but every market is very different. So, to just see, commercial business, there's some small markets where commercial business is a big part of it. And some of the smaller accounts are already coming back. And there's markets that are, have exceeded their 2019 levels already. So it's all over the board. And, not everything is like New York or San Francisco, where it's going to be, a slower climb back.
Yeah, no, that's true. And I know you do a lot of work even for the ownership groups and the asset managers, asset management community. So do you think the P&L impact of the current segment and channel mix is really different? And does a heavier leisure index mean, is it more profitability? And any words of advice for hotel GMs and owners? Like, do they need to realign their products and services? Should the teams like sales and revenue and marketing, should be reallocated based on the new normal?
Well, I think it's been a big change for sales teams who normally would, the focus was always weekday and it was focused on BT. I think that a lot of salespeople have had to learn about pursuing leisure business, working with convention and visitors bureaus or DMOs around festivals and activities, and, trying to come up with packaging and destination kind of things to pursue longer term stays. I mean, one of the other interesting things, I didn't show a slide on it, but a really interesting thing that we saw in the data is that Thursday and Sunday, which were traditionally for 30 years, that they've been the down nights and nobody can fill them and it's always tough to fill, they were performing almost as well as Friday and Saturday night. So it was Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday that was the problem. But the shoulder nights were actually very good. And a lot of that, and the length of stay was longer. And that's because people could work remotely. So they could work Friday and Monday from a remote location. So they would check in on Thursday and stay till, to depart on Monday. And suddenly our length of stay grew by 1 or 1.5 nights. So I think that the whole focus in terms of the customer acquisition and the sales, marketing, and revenue teams, I think from an owner point of view, the concept of moving more to integrated commercial strategy teams is one that is taking root. And many of the management companies are moving in this direction. The brands are talking about moving in this direction. They've named, commercial directors, and, now it's digital and sales and revenue kind of under the umbrella of commercial strategy. So I think that most people cut their revenue teams, the sales teams and revenue management in, by 30 to 50%. I don't think that headcount will come back, but I think we will operate more efficiently because the teams will be more integrated instead of siloed as they were before. So I think there's a organizational move to commercial strategy that will be more efficient, but it also will create enable the teams to be able to look more holistically at the business opportunities and be more nimble to be able to jump on those opportunities, whether it's longer weekend stays, whether it's leisure focused. I mean, those longer weekend stays, are they business or leisure? I mean, they may be a combination. So I think we have to kind of change our thinking and just look at the demand and understand it. Chinmay, I'm not hearing you.
Sorry. I was saying that that's absolutely correct. The commercial optimization is a big theme. I think, and especially driven by ownership groups and REITs, etc., who are, asking their hotels and management companies that you can't run it the way you used to earlier, and you have to optimize with, lesser amount of teams. And I'm sure technology will play a big role as well. We have a question from the audience from Samir Mehra talking about the economy hotels have done well based on the data. Going forward, will that continue? I think part of the reason why they did well also was that, they're very scattered. There's a big dependency on road travel. But from a commercial segment penetration and performance, as we see the recovery, any thoughts by chain scales on will that stay or will that mix change?
Well, I think as you saw in the forecast, the economy and the mid-scale will come back quicker. And a lot of the reason is because they aren't the largest portion of their demand is not commercially driven. And if it is commercially driven, it's local corporate accounts, it's local kind of road warriors, the salespeople who drive in local regional markets, and leisure, people on the road traveling, getting from place to place, or people who are, long-term stays. So I think the economy and mid-scale hotels are just less dependent on that larger commercial business, which is what dropped off. And, we had half of the demand in the US was dependent on large commercially driven accounts, and they stopped traveling. So that's why our RevPAR went down 52%. So I think for the economy and mid-scale, they're definitely going to just a larger portion of their business, 80% or more is driven by what we would consider leisure. So that business just didn't drop off as much and will come back sooner. So it's not so much that, and the degree to which they are driven by commercial business, it's more local and regional, and therefore will come back sooner.
Right. Yeah, I think that makes sense. Given that there is a visible recovery on the leisure side, I mean, in terms of channel mix, I mean, we see that the OTA partners are doing well. There are some new business models on the horizon as well, like closed user groups, like TripAdvisor has launched Trip Plus. Google has kind of made the listings available organically. I mean, do you see any significant change in the channel mix in the recovery, and what should the hoteliers and the distribution executives be thinking about?
Well, it's funny. One of the patterns that we saw through COVID was the loyalty member rate business from the brands and the direct booking programs from the independents really did very well. And I think part of that was because people were concerned about if they had to cancel or change a reservation, or if they wanted more information about what was going on, in terms of safety and sanitation and health precautions. They would be more comfortable dealing directly with the hotel. So it's hard to know if that pattern will persist as we go through the recovery, to know if those same programs will maintain their position. I mean, overall, there's been, as I said, upper upscale, and upper midscale have had very strong performance from their direct booking kind of activity. So I think these programs will have an influence because they're leisure focused, and leisure is kind of the fish that are swimming these days. That's the business that we've got out there. So I think they'll certainly, and during COVID, a lot of the OTAs and others didn't advertise or put the same kind of money into the market. So I think that there will definitely be more sort of competition for that leisure traveler. But depending on how the brands and the individual hotels handle those direct programs and engage with the customer base will determine, their comfort level in continuing to keep booking directly or going through some of these other third-party options. So, the Google program, you might feel to a traveler like they were booking directly. So it's hard to know. And the TripAdvisor program is interesting. I have no idea what the uptake will be. I think we're all kind of watching to see that. So I think that, it all comes down to value proposition to the consumer. And if they feel that there's some benefit to doing that compared to booking directly. But for sure, the hotels had a big boost during COVID with, we had a 15% rise in direct bookings over COVID. And, to see how if that will be maintained or not, I'm not sure if these other programs will be compelling enough to get people kind of off that.
Yeah. And typically in a downturn, there's always a trend of independent hotels, getting more attracted towards brands. Do you expect any significant change in that process? Like would the smaller independent portfolio of hotels, et cetera, or independent owners, would they be more attracted towards brands, or no difference?
It depends on the markets. As I said, the COVID had an extremely uneven impact. I mean, there were markets that were, did perform 20%, or 80% down from 2019. And there were markets that were, kind of at 90% of 2019. So depending on where your property is and what the nature of demand is in that market, and if you think a brand would, provide more support for what that demand in the market, get you a bigger share of it. So I think it's the one thing we learned in COVID is you really have to get granular at looking at the nature of demand, because it has a huge impact on what is available, what you go after, how you resource your teams. And same question as to whether you would go with a brand or independent. There's a lot of owners that are struggling to make their mortgage payments. So, everything is up for grabs. And I think everything is up for discussion right now.
Yeah, no, that definitely makes sense. We have a question from John from FTU about staffing or lack of. And we've seen this, that at corporate offices, it's been hard to retain product and technology folks because, a lot of skills are transferable. And then at the hotel level, retail and some other industries have actually performed pretty well. So it is a genuine concern about, lack of staffing in the industry. Do you have any data points or thoughts about how big that problem is, and is it going to get solved as business starts to come back?
Well, we've partnered with a company called Hotel Effectiveness that's tracking labor and, kind of tracking the growth of the employment growth over time. It's really challenging. I mean, there's no question about it. It's really tough because, hotels are closing wings and floors and everything else, and general managers and directors of sales are making beds instead of, selling groups. It's been really tough. I mean, it's hard to know when the, kind of unemployment benefits run out in September and how things will go. It's going to be a rough summer because the demand is looking very strong. I think Q3 is going to be for sure the strongest quarter of the year. And it's very, very hard to operate hotels when the staffing limits are what they are. So I think it will hurt growth somewhat. There's no question that hotels have had to restrict occupancy in order to accommodate the guests they have. And I think, restricting cleaning until the guests leave, I mean, all of these things have helped, not just from a sanitation and safety point of view, but also from a labor point of view. So I think we're going to have definitely some drop off in growth, but I'm hoping that the staffing kind of catches up and, this period of it doesn't last that long that we're in right now.
Yeah. And John, at least some of us are not going anywhere. I think it's got nothing to do that nobody is calling me from any other industry, but I think the future is definitely bright. So, Cindy, we are approaching the end of our allotted time. Couple of quick questions. In terms of the forecast, do you have any data points on which markets or cities will perform well for the next 6 to 9 months, and which might not do that well in top cities or markets? Any thoughts?
Well, so again, as I mentioned, everything is driven by that dependence on the commercial portion of demand. So the markets that have the highest proportion will suffer the most. But when we look at kind of market types, I mean, the small cities and the suburban areas have done much better so far. The resort destinations are quite close to levels, especially the ones Florida has done especially well. I mean, California's been slower because they were shut down for longer. So I think that the rural interstate markets, as we call it, kind of the highway, and this is where a lot of the economy and mid-scale hotels would be found, as well as small cities, small metro areas, and suburban areas are definitely doing better. But any one of the markets that has a higher dependence on the larger corporate accounts and the group business will take another couple of years to come back. And we've rank ordered all the markets, and it's pretty clear that's what the data is looking like. I mean, we have out of 975 submarkets, there's probably 150 that are going to get really within spitting distance of 2019 levels. And then there's probably 150 that are not even close, that, like in New York City, that really have a long way to go. And then we have the middle, which is mixed based on how much of their demand is sort of national corporate account driven, group based, and how much is more local and regional.
Yeah, that's helpful. So we have some great panels this morning talking about connectivity and revenue optimization, but any parting thoughts for the distribution and the commercial executives on, things to keep in mind as you look at this recovery?
So I think the biggest lesson that I have learned is just understanding the nature of demand at a very granular level will be essential. Like, you just can't say kind of corporate. It's like, which part of corporate, and what is the length of stay, and which segments, like, is it government, is it consortia, like which types of business, trying to align resources with where the opportunity is, and knowing that so much more of the leisure rate categories and leisure channels are stronger and trying to take advantage of that going forward, and just being very mindful of the business mix, because that's really driving everything. You know, instead of just the knee jerk, like, well, we're always going to go after corporate and we're always going to go after group. It's like you have to really think in every region and every market, where is that? What is the nature of that business, and what are the channels that are driving that business? And what are the levers within the channels that we can do to stimulate more of it?
Thank you. That's great advice. Thank you so much, Cindy. Sorry. I'm going to hand it over to Audrey for the rest of the conversation, but thank you so much for your insights and expertise.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
Thank you both. Thanks, Cindy. Thanks, Chinmay. That was really valuable. It really makes you realize how important. We've always known that data is so important. We've all struggled with that in the hospitality industry, as Cindy, as you know. So this was really insightful and gives us a lot of places to focus going forward for our hotels and our members. So thank you both very much. That was really helpful. So next, I'd like to introduce our payment session, which will be moderated by Sandra Sari, Director, Global Distribution, Strategy and Operations at Hyatt Hotels. And she's also one of our pillar chairs. This is going to be a pre-recorded session just because of all the global members that will be on the panel. The payment experts are going to discuss how the industries, including hospitality, can effectively and efficiently integrate payment solutions to enable contactless payment options. They're going to really explore how to make this transition more manageable. But before we start that, I also want to thank two of our annual sponsors. The companies will be on this payment session, so I thought it would be appropriate to thank them. We have Adyen, who is a HEDNA annual conference sponsor for this year, for 2021, as well as XanderPay, who is our annual digital sponsorship for 2021. So we really want to thank them. And I will have Ewald start that session for us.
So thank you very much, and welcome to our HEDNA at Home participants on our payment-specific panel. Today, we will be focusing on the contactless journey, which is the main focus of our guest-centric working group under the payments pillar for HEDNA. I have three gentlemen joining me here today. I am probably the real rookie when it comes to payments, but the three gentlemen have a career of experience in the payments areas. So thank you for being here today and sharing your knowledge and experience with the HEDNA members who are joining today for the HEDNA at Home conference. And let's start with the introductions. I would ask Mark first, so we follow the sun.
That sounds good. Hi, everyone. Greetings from Singapore. My name is Mark Rademacher. I'm heading up hospitality for Adyen. We're a Dutch payment provider supporting all different types of travel merchants, and looking forward to working and listening in on this innovative panel. Thanks.
Thank you, Mark. How about Tony?
Thank you, Sandra. My name is Tony Rami. I founded and I drive the growth for the last 10 years of Camtox, which is a fintech company specializing on the automation of currency management and using currencies as a competitive advantage for companies in any sector, but of course with a big presence in the travel industry.
Thank you very much. And last but not least, David, who probably needs no introduction to the HEDNA community.
I've been there a long time. Thank you, Sandra. I'm David Cabreza. I have just joined with XanderPay in the last couple of months, a B2B hospitality fintech that I think a number of the people within HEDNA will be well aware of. Before that, I was with Hilton, with Intercontinental, with Le Méridien Hotels for the last 25 years. But it's really been this intersection of both the hotel industry and the payment sector that has really been quite fascinating to me. So I'm really pleased to be here.
Thank you very much. So to get us started, and it's kind of inevitable these days to talk something about the life we are living these days, and I can't avoid not mentioning the pandemic, but I thought to take a positive spin on it, since we are on all very different locations. I wanted to ask you to maybe talk about what do you experience in your location specifically, which shows us something, how we are coming out of the pandemic, and any interesting things that that you could share with the audience here today from your lives these days.
I'm happy to jump in, Sandra. I just completed my first international trip, which was interesting. I was so pleased to be back up in the air and back out with business meetings, but it was a challenge. I have had to have 4 COVID tests. I had to quarantine for 10 days upon returning to London. But I have to say, these are understandable hurdles that we have to work through. It is good to see that travel is picking up again. It's good to see that restrictions are beginning to ease. But we are slowly getting there. I think vaccinations are picking up here, certainly in London. 3 out of the 4 people in my house are fully vaccinated, and the 4th is taking COVID tests all the time. So I think we're we're finally getting close. Hopefully, fingers crossed, we're not going to have too many bumps along the way.
We always hope that it's a one-way progress, right?
Yeah.
Not going back to where we've been before.
Yeah, no,
David, I think, oh, go ahead, Tony, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say that on the professional side, we're definitely seeing a strong pickup by those companies. And as you can imagine, in the space of foreign exchange, what we mostly see is international travel. So we're very happy to see that the reservations are picking up. Then the validates, of course, most of the validates are for the summer and after the summer. But also at a personal level, I can see my family starting to build some plans for international travel, something that had not happened for the last year and a half. So clearly, I think we're all seeing the light at the end of the tunnel. It will take a bit of time until we fully recover, but certainly I think the trend is very, very positive in the last weeks.
Right. Do you have your family around, or do you need to travel to connect?
I have most of them in Spain, so it's of course we've been seeing each other, but now the plans are, or the rumors are starting to say to plan a trip somewhere else for the summer. So that's quite encouraging as well. And that revenge travel, concept that I think is also applicable at home, of saying, okay, we were denied last year, we need to make it double this time.
Sounds good. How about you, Mark?
Yeah, no, I got excited when David talked about international travel, so I sort of just jumped in there. I, for one, have not traveled at all since March of last year, so been in Singapore on a albeit small but lovely island, and so really am looking forward to that, and I will fully participate in the revenge travel, Tony, for sure. I think on a personal note, one thing that I've really liked, actually, if there's anything coming out of the pandemic, has been, particularly in APAC and in Asia, we see a formality around business, right? I mean, dressing up to meetings and meeting with hotels and other travel customers of ours. What I've really enjoyed is the humanity side of it, right? The Zoom calls, the kids, the dogs, everybody in the rooms. So I do like the fact that that's there. And as you see things coming back now, there's almost a willingness to share and to talk about experiences. Those first 5 minutes of just chit chat with everyone, I think it really helps break down some of the initial walls that we used to have. And I hopefully will see that will remain there. I mean, so I'm excited about kind of getting to see people face to face, not just virtually, but over coffee or a drink and so forth.
Yeah, I think you're right. We became a bit more human in stepping each other's lives with everything happening at home. So indeed, great stories. Thank you. I'm sure we would have different ones if we look further to the west from the US. There's a lot of activities going on and a lot of more freedom domestically primarily, but then we'll see how it goes. So a lot of positive stories around the world for sure. Thanks very much for sharing yours and your perspectives. So today's topic is about the contactless journey. And as I was thinking about what it really means, I actually thought about an experience that happened a few weeks back with me. I got a note from the school of my son saying that they issued a check for me about a year ago that's going to expire soon. As I'm not origin to this country, I didn't know checks were still a thing when it comes to sending money, but it is actually. So with the piece of paper I got a year ago, I put it on the side of the fridge, and as I was forgot about it, since not too much opportunity to go into any banks, any branches to get cash out of my check. And so the school was asking if they needed me to reissue this this piece of paper, so I can do something about it. And I just said, like, I don't know, when will I go? I don't really feel like going. And then the lady just said that, you know what, I think with the app, you can actually process your check. You don't need to go to the bank to do anything with it. And I was so pleasantly surprised that that I have to say that that it was an experience that I did not expect from something like that. So as I was thinking about it, how to approach this contactless payments topic, what I would like to ask you first is maybe tell us a bit about how do you see, in which ways you see this contactless journey is becoming part of our lives. As you're with payment companies, not necessarily in the hospitality industry, but interacting with the hospitality industry a lot. Besides the contactless journey, if you can think of any other examples, other industries where this is already part of our lives, and share us maybe some stories where they did a better job than where we are currently. Mark, would you like to start?
Sure. There's been a lot of interesting use cases, that we've seen applied for contactless journeys, and just, I guess, the need for digital transformation overall. It's really, really amazing, some of it. And it might have been because storefronts were closed, or traditional B2B companies said, well, if our distributor's closed, then how do I go direct to consumer? And so there was very quickly, web shops created, lots of activity around that, and then the need for sending out links to obviously make payments where they traditionally weren't doing that. So, and then when there was a run on certain supplies, they were able to send those out. We saw a lot of that early on in the pandemic. The other thing which I saw was really interesting for contactless journeys as well was the removal of cash, of course, and just that friction was around logistics as well. So you think about the freight forwarders, the logistic companies that come and drop packages off that require cash on delivery for specific payments around customs and other export duty fees, and so forth. These companies came, asking for a process that would help to create a contactless journey, so they wouldn't have to engage and receive funds, be able to just leave the package, but then have all of that payment done in advance. So we saw a lot of activity around that as well.
Right. Yes, I think in the past couple of years, we may be very much focused on digital transformation as to touching screens, making everything a digital platform, and which just became something we no longer want to touch anything, right?
Sandra, I think it's funny that you talk about touching, and that makes me think of voice. So when you're asking the question, I was recalling something that happened this weekend when my partner was planting some tomatoes in our back garden, and he asked me to order more compost. And I know everyone talks about Amazon being, the king of this, but it really was amazing. And I sat there, literally just said, Alexa, order more compost. And she said, you recently bought this, whatever it was. Do you want to reorder it? And I said, yes. Add to basket, and I was done. And I thought I didn't have to move. I didn't have to type anything. I didn't have to open a laptop or log into anything, get a credit card, remember a password. I didn't even have to go pick it up. It was delivered to the house. Returns are super easy. They are free. It's like, how could you make it any easier? It almost is impossible to not want. As much as I have not wanted to continually buy through Amazon, they just make it so easy. And I think that's ultimately going to be one of the things that is really important to the customers, that the journey is easy, that we start thinking about moving into voice. And I appreciate that more complex purchases, require kind of different information that might not be as easy as a bag of compost. But that is, I think, certainly going to be the way that the future generations are working towards, is they're just entering into more of a conversational type of commerce.
It might be
David,
very for many of us conversation.
I was going to say that I can beat your story of an even more contactless experience, which was with the tax authorities here in Spain. One day I just checked and I said, oh, I have 300 euros less in my account. What happened? And eventually they just took a payment for my over speeding in the highway. I didn't even have to ask. Just a joke, but indeed, I think that all experiences are becoming closer and closer to this, right? Where, I mean, we all have in mind the examples of the Amazon where you pick up even the stuff and there's not even a cashier, and it takes it from your cart in Amazon. And I'm sure, Mark, you have a million experiences and a million cases like this, but I even think that this has been quite early on, and in the end it's just following that trend, which makes all of our lives simpler, as you're all saying.
When we talk about
maybe just, sorry, Sandra, I was going to say, just to round out, based on your conversation around the check, I actually wrote my first check a couple months ago, probably the first time in years, for my son's driver's license. And when I saw it hit my bank account, I saw this number is 3000018. I thought, what is that? I called my bank and I said, I've got some charge I don't recognize. They passed me to the fraud department. They said, yeah, this is strange. It's usually a name, not a number. And then later we realized it was a check. I thought even their fraud team is not recognizing a check number because so few people are using them. I just thought how bizarre, that we've moved on in some ways, so quickly, and yet we still have some of those legacy, systems or payment methods out there that are still around,
Yes, absolutely. When you mentioned legacy systems, just some systems from our lives in hospitality and the travel industry, like our CRSs and our quite adult age systems came into my mind. We still stick to those in some of the cases, and at the same time we are trying to catch up with the developments and with the technology these days. So when we talk about hospitality more specifically and contactless journey, which are the areas where actually you feel this would reflect differently in our lives? And which are the points that the hospitality industry has already embraced and you feel we might be behind and maybe missing out?
In my case, I'm clearly biased by the experience, but I see, I mean, we talk a lot about the contactless experience and the payment method, but we see a very basic problematic in something as basic as the currency in which the client is charged. We work with many hotel chains, but if you look, and they fight to get a direct booking, right, to avoid intermediaries, maximize their margin, and so on. But when I try to book a hotel from a Spanish chain in the Caribbean, they are forcing me to pay in US dollars. And this is just astonishing to me. And I don't think it's unique to this Spanish chain. I think it happens on the major chains as well, where it's, it's hotel centric. I'm a hotel in Thailand and I charge my customers in Thai baht. And it's not even reaching the point of the contactless experience, but we clearly see a lot of those. And of course, this is where we are advocating and trying to help. But sometimes we try to figure out and be super modern in certain things when some of the basics have not been fixed. And this is one clear example of this, in our opinion.
So the current.
Sorry, go ahead.
Please go ahead, David.
I was going to say, I think adding on to that, Tony, that is certainly one of the complexities with the hotel industry. We've got guests in one country, hotels in another country. We're crossing borders. We've got different currencies, different payment methods. As do you focus on a guest-centric payment strategy or one which is more property-based? But I think in addition to that, in addition to like the crossing border side, we've got this issue of crossing time, where some of the payments are being taken now for a future stay, and others are simply capturing the payment information to charge later on, particularly if the guest doesn't show. And then you've also got this issue of the payments crossing multiple entities. So you will have a guest who is perhaps with a corporate entity, maybe booking through a TMC or an OTA, and then that information and the payment details passing through the GDS or booking channels, and then to the brand, then to the hotel and the PMS. So there's so many different components. You can see how the complexity is really challenging to deal with. And I think that's one of the things that we're really struggling with that makes it difficult to simply say, Amazon or Alexa, book me a hotel in Milan. It's challenging.
So when you talk about the complexity, do you think it's complex for the industry to solve, or it's complex and challenging for the guests to experience?
I think it's both. That's why we are still where we are now. It's not impossible to solve, but I think if it were an easy solution, we would have been there. I know the hotel industry is perhaps sometimes a little bit slow to catch up with some of these things, but there have been huge developments over the last 5 years. For those who have attended the HEDNA conferences, they'll have seen that there's new technology. There are new partners who are in place. The ability to do a lot of these cross-border payments that we did not have, certainly when I joined HEDNA, is now there. So it's now just a matter of connecting all the dots, bringing the partners together, and making that work in a way that is cost-effective for the hotels or for the chains, and easy for the guests.
Mark, you have a lot of experience with not necessarily just hotels, but airlines maybe, or OTAs, so other representatives of our travel and larger industry. How do we compare to those in your views?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because I feel like the most activity we've seen during the pandemic has come from hotels because of this need, right, for contactless and digital transformation. I think everyone recognizes that this is something that they need to provide. The question is, how fast can they act on it? And I think, especially at the beginning of last year, we saw hotels that had really shared an interest to us, saying, hey, we need to look in this direction, but they were hesitant to move because they might be a luxury property, and they might be thinking they need to offer a high touch experience. And they were worried that, a contactless journey, would that be distracting the guests from, the true guest experience that evokes the lobby and what they want to provide to their guests. But what I think was really interesting was they found more uptake on this than ever before. And, I think it's also demonstrating to hotels, much like with airlines and others, is that you can have a high touch and a low touch experience in the same property, and it'd be welcomed by different guests. I mean, many of us would love to have a check-in in the room, but some of us are off a 10-hour flight and really just want to take a shower, right? Just let me get to my room, let me get to as fast as possible, and let me unpack my bags. So I think you're going to have different elements of that. And I think for the guest experience, the last 12, 14 months have really shown that, and providing a true contactless journey has been really, really welcomed and received by a lot of the hotels.
I'm very curious when we think about customer or contactless journey, then are we really focusing on arriving to the hotel and how do I get to my room, or what else in your views are part of this?
Yeah, it varies, right? And I think that's also causing a lot of noise and distraction for hotels. So it's really identifying what's the right solution that I want to provide. We've seen solutions that are called contactless, but then the guest shows up, they still need to take out their card, they still need to do a pre-authorization on a terminal. That's not really contactless. So what we're trying to push for is really helping hotels to not only take payments and obviously tokenize in advance of the stay, to do a pre-authorization remotely, and then to push that information directly into the PMS, but then also to support and to help that process of also uploading the identification that's required that otherwise might be regulations by country to country. So it's really creating a single use case for multiple countries that have to have different laws and regulations on what they need to provide in advance of the guest check-in.
Tony, an OTA and airline perspective and the currencies you have mentioned that it's quite confusing to the guests and not necessarily to the hotels. How do you see those?
No, I mean, in essence, for me, something is the contactless piece of it, right? And the other thing is the speed and the guest centricity of it, as David was saying. In the end, what we don't want is just to focus on the experience being contactless. The key is also to focus on the overall experience of the guest, and as Mark was saying, what is it that they value in different circumstances and so on. And it has a deep impact, and this is where I think the industry as a whole has a bit more homework to do, which is to connect the finance side of the business with the distribution side of the business, with the commercial element of the business. And I think, once again, this is where I would like to see more distribution people, more commercial people from the business attending more finance-centric conferences, and the other way around. Right, because I believe it's too much siloed, and is finance imposing certain processes that break that experience, and they are not connected. And it's only by getting them into the same table and sharing the same problematics where all of these, it's not, I don't want to say it's easy to solve, but it's easier if they talk to each other. And that is when things like the currency, normally the finance department is the one pushing back and saying, I don't want to deal in more currencies. And is the commercial side saying, well, if I'm not selling in sterling to the UK guests, they are all going to go through all the channels that are offering them so, because it's a competitive advantage to do so. Even if I am putting the right payment method of the right PSP, right? I can be using Adyen to charge the card in euros or in sterling, but it makes a difference for the UK people to charge them in sterling. And, just not talking internally is what causes these frictions.
Yeah, I think it's very interesting what you say, and something that seems to be a recurring topic this year. As I did have a little bit more exchange with our payments pillar at HEDNA and inside the company I work for as well. Really to connect the commercial side with the finance teams and open our conversations and make sure we understand each other's needs and each other's challenges as well. So certainly a lot to do for us when it comes to make progress in the right way. So we talked about a lot of things as to would be nice to move the industry into this direction. What do you think? What is the biggest hurdle today that you see in your everyday work, like a recurring topic that's the point that always comes up, like something we would need to jump to make sure that we actually get to the next level as an industry?
I'm happy to jump in here. I obviously have been working with the payments forum within HEDNA for many years. I think one of the most recurring things for me has been the issue around virtual credit cards and the work that HEDNA had spearheaded along with HTNG to both educate hotels, but then develop some standards around how to pass more of the information that the hotels need, so that when the guests arrive, they have a seamless, pleasant check-in. That then evolved into a lot of the work that has come out of the Open Payment Alliance and trying to come up with alternatives to virtual credit cards. And that for me has been, and for everyone who has attended HEDNA for recent years, that's something that we have been working on. For me, that's personally really exciting, and that's quite honestly one of the main reasons why I am in the new position I'm in. Having worked for hotels for a long time, have wanted to see this happen. I've wanted to see all the partners across the industry, whether it is on the supplier side or the buyer side, or someone in between, all the partners, including the payment companies, to work together to find ways to make this more efficient. So that is, I think, the big challenge, but the great opportunity that I see.
Sounds good. Certainly needs a lot of us to move into the same direction to make this happen. But changes only always happen with small steps, as we say. So just need to get started and need to get going. Tony, anything you could mention?
No, I think it's along the same lines. No, it's this streamlining of the internal operation as well with the external operations. Mark, you're referring to with the virtual credit cards as an example to the guest experience, and is related to what I just said on the finance and the commercial topics. Is I think all of these standards, the work, the Open Payment Alliance, and what has been happening on the last years is moving towards that standardization that will help everybody. I mean, set the right expectations for what it needs to happen internally, so it transpires externally to the experience. So I fully concur with David on this aspect.
Yeah, maybe if I can also just add, I mean, just to comment on both. I think both it's very, very, I think both of these are both really very true and realistic problems that the industry has to overcome, right? I mean, the standardization of payments, I think this really, we'll see a lot coming in the next few years from that. I think there's a real need for that. And as we come out of the pandemic, we'll see hotels focus more on trying to apply some of the learnings that they've had from HEDNA, hopefully, and then and kind of gear more focus on that. And just to highlight also something that that Tony had mentioned earlier, I also believe that, there's always so much focus and centered around payments being a cost, but also being more of an enabler to access local payment methods. So I know we've had conversations with XanderPay in the past about, wouldn't it be great if someone who is coming from France can use a payment method of their preference when they're in, at a hotel in Australia, and vice versa. And in order to enable that, right, that's going to require some standardization and also really an understanding from the finance departments working in concert with the distribution people to say, this is actually something that is going to help us open more opportunities. And maybe these payment methods come at a lower price point than the credit cards, right? So it's fixating on that conversation and driving that more towards how can we talk a little bit more about payments being that enabler, and then opening up things like currency, which can be a revenue source as well. So I think these are things which we need to highlight as a collective group in the payments area to hotels.
I think very much to Tony's point, making sure that we are addressing these silos that we have within individual companies, because it is very much a finance issue, but it's also very much a systems issue and very much an operations issue and very much a distribution issue. And so it's making sure that we've got all the right people, even within one company, to come together and see the relevance of that. And that's, that is a challenge. There are a lot of very specific things about payments that someone in any one of these silos might not pick up, and so it really requires collaboration not only within our companies but then within the broader industry.
And just to add to this is why this is a topic that, I mean, in order to make a fast fix, and making a fast fix is what generates a competitive advantage to those who move first. It's an issue to be addressed at the top of the company, because in the end, the incentives of the reason for these silos are the individual incentive to each one of these departments, and they are going after their own interest. And eventually, they will all move to this way of working when the others have done so, and it's evident it is better for them. But it's sometimes this topic of payment, and if I take it to my field, the currency, say, oh, this is a topic for finance, and you should take care of this. When it is not, it is when someone at the top management of the company says, this is important. It's important that we rebuild the entire change, that I am the one that's puts everyone on that table. And this is the catalyst of change. And we are seeing a lot of these on these days where the hotels had to rethink their strategies and say, okay, it's a good time to think at least and to rebuild. And we also believe that the fact that there's been some early adopters will make that the process is faster for the others that in the end usually go in second or third position.
Very interesting point to mention. I think that we always talk about being very guest-centric and from the guest perspective, right? We probably all know what's in it for the guest. But you mentioned some of the points, and I would love if we a little bit more detail go through those. That what's in it for the industry, what's in it for the various stakeholders. So maybe that this helps. To each and one of us have those conversations internally, even if it's not our primarily field payments or move this topic, but maybe we can get the buy-in of those stakeholders who then can make the decisions and make them move forward. Can you help me with that, please? Just some of the highlights, some of the what's in it for us to make this happen.
I'm happy to jump in again, putting kind of my hotelier hat on. Very hard for me to leave that, but I think that a lot of these inefficiencies that we've had within the industry around payments and how we are handling cross-border payments, they have offered opportunities for other companies outside that traditional guest hotel relationship. And that's where you see that there are opportunities that the OTAs have moved in and really capitalized on to say, okay, we will offer you all of these payment methods that are relevant to a Chinese guest that some of the hotel companies had not been able to do as quickly. And they create these solutions which have created a new part of the industry, which is, well, it's no longer new at this point, but have really kind of added to that industry. They have not been perhaps directly between the guest and the hotel anymore, but they've opened opportunities elsewhere. I think there's also been some workarounds that we have managed to find as an industry, like virtual credit cards. If we look at the way that the OTAs used to have to pass money to the properties, go back a decade, it was really challenging. And virtual credit cards offered a really nice, efficient way to do that. Is it the most cost effective? In many cases, no, but it is very efficient. And so I think, what we are now faced with doing is finding a way to offer additional alternatives for those cases where it might not be the most effective or efficient or cost-effective way of doing something. And really managing that complexity and this variety of options for payments, whether they are consumer payments or B2B payments, to find what is most appropriate for each individual transaction, or as has often said, right sizing the payments, making sure that the right solution is applied to each type of payment.
Thank you.
I would like to leave Mark first, because Mark last, because I'm sure he has very interesting and general remarks, and I'll try to keep it brief, not to hijack the conversation too much into currencies, but of course is the area I dominate the most, and to try to answer strictly your question on what's in it for each part of the company. I'll give you a very specific example. As I was saying, we see biggest hotel chains in the world forcing the currency of their property into the guests, right? It can have a root on the acquiring, not being capable of processing rubles, but I think it's less and less the case anymore. And it's usually more the finance side that is saying, I don't want to do that because this will force me to need more bank accounts, or I will have cost to convert currency. And very rightfully, they will also say, look, if I am giving them a price today in sterling, in ruble, whatever it is, and I will only collect the money in 3 months when the guest checks in, I am exposed to currency. And all of that is very true. But the answer is not to say no. The answer is to address the problem. Because once you address it, what we have proven, the finance people, but also the commercial people, is that they can incentivize behaviors. So for example, yes, what we have many hotels saying is like, look, I will charge you in sterling 1 day before the check-in through the virtual acquiring, instead of doing a physical card payment, which is of course more expensive to the hotel, and I will guarantee you the price in sterling. Otherwise, you will need to pay the price in the local currency. So they use it, as you can see, to shift the behavior they are interested in, and that is equally good for the customer. We have seen many hotels having complaints because the hotel was telling them, look, we expect that this hotel in New York is going to cost you this many sterling. And they are doing this with the spot rate of the day. And they are saying, oh, this is indicative with these ugly boxes, with we don't commit that this is the price you will be charged. And when the customer actually goes through that hurdle and even, is brave enough to still do the payment on the website of the hotel, it turns out that what they are paid is a lot more than the indicative price. Why? Because his issuing bank is charging them a hell of a lot of money to the currency conversion, and they have complaints. When actually, when you tell the guest, this is your price in sterling and you charge this might even have a markup, an extra revenue for the hotel, but that extra revenue makes it that it's less than what his credit card would apply. So they are actually saving money for the guest. They are making more money. They have less complaints. And the financial director is even capable of reporting that this extra revenue is thanks to him, because he is the one that has enabled this behavior. So hopefully I was clear into highlighting what are the benefits on the different parts that are implicated, that today they are just looking angry at each other and saying, I'm not doing this for you.
Absolutely, Tony. Thank you. I was taking notes.
Sorry if I'm a bit aggressive on my messaging, but I just hope that it's graphical enough.
Absolutely. It's very good. And thank you very much. Mark, anything you would add?
No, I think, one of the quandaries I found when I first started really focusing on hospitality a few years ago was the power dynamic between brands, the property owners, and so forth, which, if you think about payments, really plays a big factor when you see that. And some things, even as a consumer previous to that, I didn't realize. And if I look at OTAs or airlines who have a bit more control, if I can say that, in terms of the payments, the payment methods they want to offer, the customer journeys, and so forth, there's so much complexity in that, and then we've already addressed that. But I think that's something that those members have to come together, and there has to be an agreement. And we've seen pockets around the world where there is a little bit more, let's say, unified approach to the way they will work together to address payments. But I would love to see, the brands be a little bit more aggressive on how they want to dictate payments, when they want to do that, if they want to apply the currencies, things like that. How do they manage that on the forefront when the hotel owners, do they have the trust to have that done on the front end and not be waiting for the payments, and who's going to be the merchant of record, and all of these issues that need to be applied. So that, I think, is really creating a lot of hindrance into developing the payment strategy that needs to happen, and really to hit all of these successful points that we want to see in the next few years.
Thank you, Mark. I can't believe how quickly this time that we had today have flown by. I just looked at the watch. I haven't, I'm not saying 100, but a number of questions that I still would love to ask. But as we are coming to the end of our time today, I think that what I'm hearing from you is that we certainly need an industry level collaboration to make changes last and make changes happen. I hear that guests need flexibility. They would like to have that sort of flexibility they have at different areas of their lives to be present when they think about their hotel stay as well. And there's huge opportunities and savings for the industry to make. So for me, it sounds like something really should work towards too. Just as a last thought, if you could really just very briefly, maybe in one sentence, if you have one wish or one recommendation for the industry to make sure they focus on for the remainder of the year, do you have such things? Is there something you could put on our agenda?
I would simply encourage the hotel companies in particular, who are all, of course, suffering through this, to look to the future and to use the time now to build the systems and the processes so that when guests are traveling again and we've got that demand, that we are well placed to capitalize on it. I think revenues will come back when they come back, when restrictions are lifted. In the meantime, we can focus on the costs and the efficiencies, and it's for those who are able to do it, it's a good time to invest in that.
So David says time is now. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll just to add to that. I mean, for me, we've seen, just such a warm reception to contactless journeys and that digital transformation that's happened. For those hotels that maybe were thinking about it and haven't acted yet, I would say continue that path, right? There has been a little bit of noise thinking, well, things will just revert back to normal and everyone's just going to come to the front desk and they'll just check in like they did before. I don't really believe that. I actually think that we're seeing a really big change in the industry, and I think that that's here to stay. So I would love to see those hotels that have thought about that to continue down that path, create unified commerce solutions for your guests, to give them that flexibility of that high touch, low touch, and hopefully across all your properties. That would be great.
Thank you very much, Mark.
And on my side, for me, is do not try to rebuild what you already have. Try to think from a blank piece of paper. What is the ideal way to go about this? And then, of course, you will say, okay, I cannot go the ideal, but with the ideal in mind, you probably are able to make the changes that will bring you there closer in time, and then if you just try to rebuild what you have.
Thank you very much, Tony. That's a great advice as well. I hope everybody will keep this in mind for the year. I would like to thank you to Mark, Tony, and David for being here with us today. I really enjoyed our conversation, so thank you very much. Also, thanks to HEDNA for being our payments sponsor for the year, and for Xander Pay for the digital sponsor of the year. We will be returning back with 3 payment-specific webinars throughout the year, so please stay tuned for the dates we will share shortly. And thank you very much, gentlemen. Have a lovely rest of your day.
You too. Thanks, Sandra.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Well, thanks very much to the payment panel and for Sandra for pulling that global representation together. It was very informative. When I worked at a hotel company, it was a very interesting conversation, trying to have conversations and pulling finance, distribution, but then also making sure that you have the individual hotels in that conversation. So this team, this pillar group has done a lot of work to focus on consumer demands for completely or almost completely contactless payment options. And they're really focused on customer-centric options. So lots of really good information there that we should be focusing on as an industry. So there will be more to come from this pillar over the coming months. As Sandra mentioned, they will be having 3 webinars over the next few months. So watch out for those and please register. Now, I'd like to go ahead and introduce our next session, which is moderated by Natalie Kimball, Vice President of Strategic Account Management, Distribution for CIGI. Natalie will be asking our panelists the tough questions regarding increased shopping traffic to CRSs and the impact downstream. Natalie, thank you for agreeing to moderate. Thank you for being on the board and pulling these 2 great, well-known industry leaders together to talk about connectivity. I'll hand it over to you, Natalie.
Thank you so much, Audrey. And you hit it on the head, the tough conversation with 2 incredible humans. So as Audrey mentioned, I'm part of the connectivity pillar. So as Sebastian kind of broke it down, we're focusing on these very incredible, important kind of industry things that we need to tackle. And connectivity and traffic is a doozy. So we are fortunate to have some incredible people here to help us tackle that. So just to kind of back up a little bit, so what we're going to be doing is really talking through what is really causing the shopping. So part of, I'll have Lou and Jenny introduce themselves in a moment, but Lou comes to us with incredible experience. He actually headed up this pillar for us in the past. And, I think pre-pandemic, what we were really looking at is how do we utilize attribute-based selling and how do we really monetize that for the hotel? Well, we think we really have to take a step back and say, what's first driving all the volume before we can start adding to it and maybe look at that attribute-based selling. So we're really going to kind of tackle what are the best practices, what are rules of engagement. We kind of see it as three really distinct areas that we can talk about. As I just mentioned, rules of engagement. The second one being what the big issues are, because then that leads us to the third, which is how do we solve them? And who's really responsible for actually getting these solutions in place? So I'm going to go ahead and ask Jenny if you can please introduce yourself.
Sure. Good morning, and it is so wonderful to see your actual face, even though not in person, so thanks for having me. I'm Jenny Mays. I am Vice President of Product Management for Distribution for Sabre Hospitality Solutions. So a big part of that role is overseeing our connectivity with the many, many partners that we provide for our customers to be able to distribute out to the demand marketplace.
And if you don't mind, just before we get in, because I wasn't kidding, if any of you people haven't met these two incredible humans, the tenure and knowledge that comes with these two people is kind of overwhelming. So if you won't mind, and not to get too much on a high horse, but tell us what you've done in the industry, where you've been.
Sure. So I've been in the industry for, can we just round and say more than 20?
We can round.
And started with Sabre, so spent quite a bit of time within the broader Sabre organization, moved into Travelocity, so was on the demand partner side for 8 to 10 years, and then spent time also at Disco, right in the heart of distribution. And that was my role just prior to coming back to Sabre and Sabre Hospitality, and working in the middle, if you will, as a CRS provider for the marketplace, trying to connect those hoteliers and demand partners.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And again, what you'll find here, especially with Lou and Jenny, is a focus kind of on the product side. So that's really where I've asked this pillar to be really directed, is around, the product. Commercials could be a component, but we really want to talk through the nitty gritty of the shopping and all the things that go with that. So Lou, if you can please give us an introduction.
Sure. Hi, everybody. Lou Harasimu. I am I'm the VP of Enterprise Distribution at Amadeus Hospitality. So I am actually a new addition for those of you who know me and didn't realize a few months ago, I actually jumped to the other side from the hotel space. So I was with IHG for about 5 years. And prior to that, I actually was at TripAdvisor. So kind of having a little bit of the the vendor experience, seeing what everybody needs, worked on the Trip Connect product and the Instant Book product. And then prior to that, just like Jenny, spent a lot of time at Sabre, going back to Synixis and even before to HubX. So worked extensively in distribution on both the OTA side as well as the PMS side. Worked within not only HEDNA, but HT&G and Open Travel, working with all the schema and specifications. So I won't put my number of years out there either, but it's been a while. So excited to see you both, and I wish I could see everybody else, but you know what?
Soon,
we'll get there soon.
Guys.
We'll get there very soon.
And I love hearing HubX. Things like that always just make me happy, like how far we've gone in this industry and all the name changes. Okay, so let's really get right into it. So we're gonna dive right into the deep end. Let's talk about, at a high level, again, guys, what we're doing is we're collecting the ideas of what are the problems that we're facing in the industry so that as a pillar group, we can work towards solutions. So as we're seeing travel come back, we had that great recap from Cindy. I think we're understanding. I was actually really surprised to hear about the Thursday, Sunday thing. It made sense in theory, but holy cow, who would have not thought that Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday would be the hard days to fill? As we're seeing that come back around, what we also know is this is increasing a massive amount of volume to the CRS. Everybody wants rates, want them on time, want them confirmed. So what are you guys seeing as the biggest impact right now that is affecting CRS traffic? I'll pass to you, Lou, if you want to go first.
Sure, yeah. I would say that really what we're seeing is just a return to what was there before, right? So we may see an increase in volume for short stays, some that are going for longer stays, but essentially what it is, and it is really kind of a return to where it was from the early days, and something that never really went down, which is essentially the shopping caching that a lot of our partners were doing. So, I remember that when the drop hit at the beginning of 2020, we actually ran into some issues with kind of our look to book ratios, because the looks maintained pretty significant, kind of went down a little bit, but the books dropped. So our look to book ratios just skyrocketed because of the fact that, there was reduced, kind of on demand requests, but that sustained shopping for caching still continued. And so really, I think what we're going to see coming up is not necessarily a spike because of the availability and us having to handle all of the new stuff coming on. It's really kind of coming back to everybody else bringing back to where they were, but that's still sustained caching continuing on.
Interesting. Yeah, because, I think about when we think about what you look to book used to be when I was on property, when we had 3,000 to 1, it was all hands on deck and everybody was just freaking out. So it's interesting. So what, again, that comes back to is that's become the responsibility of the CRS, right? Like you guys are having to shoulder that. So you're sitting here going, well, shopping is increased, booking is increasing. And, how are you actually having to manipulate all that work in the middle? So Jenny, what would your take on that question be?
Yeah, so I think there have been a lot of advances just within technology. Most systems are better able to handle these kinds of volumes, but there is still, or should be still, a partnership as we're looking at how this is being handled between the CRS, whether in-house or third party, and what the demand partners are shopping. So to Lou's point, for shopping that's going to build cash, that didn't necessarily go down, certainly didn't go down to the extent that bookings did. We did see an overall drop off in traffic, and unfortunately, I think some of that was that some providers did kind of close their doors or go dark for a while. Or demand partners did go dark for a while. And so that shopping tailed off. So while we're seeing an increase in shopping, and let me just pause and say, thank goodness, I'm thrilled to see the springtime. But while we see that happening, we're still not back to 2019 levels. But we should plan for that. We know it's coming. Travel will only continue to get stronger. Again, thank goodness that that's the position that we're in. But being able to have that partnership and how those resources are consumed is helpful, and not just, kind of to your comment about having the CRSs shoulder it. There are things that we can do and have done over time, but it is always helpful to have a demand partner who is really thoughtful about their way that they are using these resources as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I apologize. I didn't mean to imply that the shopping didn't decrease, but it didn't decrease to the same level that the bookings, right?
Oh,
so
absolutely.
Bookings absolutely dropped, shopping dropped, but not to the same level because there was that sustained caching. But I completely agree with you that it's really a matter of working with partners. And this was actually when I was at IHG, one of the things that we tried to do is work with them, even in the 2019 and 18 timeframe, is making sure that when we looked at their look to books and when we kind of compared what they were doing is, it's almost like we have to work with those guys the same way that they have to kind of work with their partners. So, a lot of these cases when we're dealing with, some partners that have they have an affiliate network behind them, right? Essentially what a lot of them were doing is passing through that availability right to us that we then had to manage and we had to sustain. And, we kind of implemented our own strategies around putting in thresholds, saying, okay, you can have X number of requests per second. Anything over that, we need to figure out why you need to go over that. If your bookings are sustained, right? I mean, if you're coming in with, 100,000 requests per second, but booking, millions of reservations, I'm not as concerned as if you're coming in at 100,000 and booking 3, right? So that same logic should apply down the path. And Jenny, as you mentioned, we should make sure that our partners are kind of working with us that way. So, if you have partners that are not giving you good volume or giving you high volume, but not good bookings, you kind of look at them and say, okay, what can we do down the road to reduce that? It needs to be most efficient all the way through and not just some players kind of throwing it over the fence saying, okay, you guys deal with it.
So I think that was an interesting question because what I'm hearing in both of you discussing, while it's important to obviously have the conversation on the demand side, what about having the same definition of a word? So what I talk about, I always use the example of package. A package means one thing to a hotel, and it means something different to a demand partner. Packages includes parking. On the other side, it may include something different. So when we talk about throttling, when we talk about look to book, like as an industry, do we have a responsibility to kind of lay down the ground rules that say, hey, these are my expectations. Here is what I'm going to ask of you, demand partner. Here is what I want to do, like kind of a cross look of data. Are you seeing the same thing that we're seeing? I really want to try and understand, it's a little bit of a leading question, but where does the responsibility of the data lie when it comes to the CRS? Is it on the demand side, or is it on the CRS, or is it a combination?
Well, with your leading, the combination, right? And it's interesting because there's a ton of data available out there. We have data, we probably don't utilize it to the extent that we should, but demand partners also have data available to them that in some cases isn't used to the extent that it, and I think a bit of it is, potentially we should take responsibility for where this industry went from the beginning, where we were much more focused on getting the connectivity in place, enabling these demand partners, enabling the rates to enable the bookings. And we didn't really think about this shopping side of it. And so haven't necessarily been in place. And we have relationships where the incentives aren't in place for us to work together as good stewards. And so I think a piece of this, to your point about laying out rules of engagement, is to be more intentional when we start working with partners about how we will work together. We do have, or should have, the same goal about what we're trying to achieve, but just making sure that we're doing it in a way that doesn't overly disadvantage one piece of the relationship, if you will.
Yeah, and I would agree with that. I think part of the challenge is, as you said, we've kind of grown over the years, and there's been, certainly larger players that have had ongoing conversations. How do we manage, kind of the load? How do we work together on things? But certainly, there's a number of, smaller regions, smaller players that participate. And then when we get into startups and innovators, a lot of those don't fully, interact with the space. They want to just jump in and kind of attack the, attack the problem and try to find a solution. And I think that it does make sense to lay down some best practices, right? From an innovator's perspective, I don't want to come in and say, no, you need to do it this way, because the whole point of innovation is to, break things, right? But on the other hand, there is a benefit to laying down ground rules, because some of the innovators have maybe pushed things in a way that makes it very inefficient for the rest of us to function, and kind of adds layers and layers that we then have to kind of peel back to get to where we need to go. I'm certainly one of the people that like to listen to what the innovators say, but it really needs to have, kind of a balance of, learn from our experience. Don't try to break things the way that we tried to break things and made things worse. Listen to what we're saying, but you know what? Tell us how we can improve things. And so it has to be that dialogue from that side.
Yeah, I think that is the perfect intersection in where, as an industry, we've kind of allowed the disruptors to sort of dictate the path. And, kind of like we saw a shift back to ADR, kind of hotels taking a little bit more control over their rates and over their discounts. I think this might be the perfect opportunity for that kind of the connectivity side of the business to kind of say, hang on a second. We understand things are broken, but it doesn't mean you're going to put more Band-Aids on a gaping wound. We're going to actually solve the problem. We're not going to use, duct tape and bungee cords anymore, and really take the opportunity to really understand kind of what's driving that. So I think that's a great point. And I think kind of leads us into something that we sort of talked about, was this blended distribution. So we're at this kind of critical point here where when you look at consolidation of OTAs, when you look at kind of who's left, this pandemic has kind of shifted a little bit who's working with who. And we've seen some huge acquisitions. We've seen, unfortunately, some of our friends and colleagues, their businesses no longer survive. And I think we're at an interesting intersection where, the volume of what we see in the traffic is really driven by a couple really huge players. So does that put us in a position where we're talking about, when you look at the overall layering of how many different companies are searching. So as an ex-Expedia-ite, I will kind of use that as an example. Back in the day, we were searching and we were sending FIT calendars for all those young kids that don't know what that is. Look it up; it'll blow your mind how we used to actually do business. And we would send. That's how we got availability. And then you look at all the brands they purchased and all the things. So at what point is the responsibility on someone like a huge player to kind of say, hey, we're looking for the same rate 15 times? And again, I'm not necessarily throwing shade. This isn't, no, but the truth is that Expedia owns a lot of different brands. So that consolidation and that layering of rates, how do we start to tackle that? Or is that something that comes after we actually solve for the increased shopping? It's kind of a chicken and egg, I would kind of think.
Yeah, it is a challenge, right? Sorry, Jen, go ahead.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
I would say that is a challenge because really in a lot of these places, the blended distribution model is essentially, let's throw it all together and provide the best availability that's out there. And you're almost having to look at how do I filter this information to ensure I'm not returning duplicate information, right? Which adds a challenge. When on the other hand, what you want to do is return information as quickly as possible. And I know a number of OTAs, their most important piece is let's get the information to the customer as fast as possible because, everybody's attention span these days is even shorter, especially now in the last year when, all we're doing is looking at screens. That we want we want everything there in front of us. We need to be able to move because we've become so internet driven in the past year. Mm-hmm. That if we introduce a layer like, okay, have I gotten this? Is this a duplicate rate? Do I need to send this stuff out? It's just more processing and more data that we have to get to, which is a challenge. And I'm not sure what the solution is, but I do think that would require kind of people sitting down and saying, okay, how do we make this more efficient as opposed to just dumping it all in and saying, okay, here's all the information, you pick and choose as a consumer. But I guess on the flip side is if you've got too many choices, all your rates are coming back at 100, what's the benefit of doing that?
Exactly. Yeah.
I think I do want to make sure that we keep front and center that just overall shopping isn't necessarily a bad thing, right? So you talk about providers, these huge providers or demand partners are also delivering high levels of bookings. And so from that standpoint, we want to support that kind of shopping. We want to support the shopping volumes that are helping our hoteliers do business and get guests into their hotel. It's really, again, that balance of just thinking about, are you doing that in an optimal and responsible way? It always comes to mind, I'm a Girl Scout with my daughter, and one of the tenets of Girl Scouting is use resources wisely. And so in the shopping arena, it's just making sure that you're using those resources wisely, which again, sometimes gets back to the incentives. And I think with some of our relationships, if we haven't put the right incentives in place and something's just free, it's very easy to not do the harder work of making sure that you're optimizing the use of those resources.
Yeah, and I think that's an excellent point. And I think, we've kind of been talking about the caching and the shopping caching, but there is a benefit to having caching. You just have to look at a better way of getting that cache, right? I mean, the push implementations have been in place for many years. Certainly there's some challenges around it when you're looking at, systems or, hotels that use revenue management systems. It's very difficult to kind of get some of that logic in there. Not everybody can support an FPLOS, can support the hurdling, so, and it's only really the larger OTAs that support that level of logic. So, it's difficult from a push perspective. From a HEDNA, as Natalie mentioned, we worked on a number of white papers a few years ago to kind of put together more efficient shopping models, the change discovery service. We looked at rendered shopping as ways that we can kind of move things forward. So change discovery is one of those things that's really kind of a more efficient one. You're not constantly hitting for availability saying, give me everything you have and then I'll figure out if anything's changed, right? You're putting the onus on the supplier to basically say, okay, this stuff has changed, only take what you need and only take what you need when you think you need it, right? So again, this is an instance where both sides are working together. On a push, any change always goes out more of a load on the supplier. When you're looking at change discovery, the change discovery system on the supplier basically says, hey, this has changed. Here's my list of changes that have occurred. Now, from an OTA perspective, you come and get it when you think you need it, right? So if you have a particular region that doesn't get much traffic, you don't always need to be pulling availability every 15 minutes. You can wait a day wait a few hours, whatever it happens to be. And again, from each side, you need to be as efficient as possible to pull the data that you need. So it's really, kind of systems working together, partners working together to get to the most efficient caching model that we need.
Well,
and then put
think,
shopping on top of that too.
Right. So I just I want to clarify really quick the caching part. So because we're talking about this, and there may be some folks that aren't, that name could have some different connotations that it has in the past, because caching has evolved so much in, what it used to be. So can you kind of touch on, as you're going through, I just want to kind of make sure everybody who's attending really understands the impact of what caching does to a CRS. So while this is a 101 kind of definition, I think it's important to understand and really talk through what that means to a CRS and how it really helps you guys optimize the traffic.
Yeah. Jenny, you want to take a cut?
Go ahead. You were
Sorry, I know I get kind of wound up in this stuff. I've been doing it for too many years, and probably because I haven't been drinking the last year, so I need to kind of bring my stress level down. So I think the biggest thing is really that what it does is it's an extra amount of data that's stored, or a copy of the data that's stored at multiple points in time. So if you have multiple systems, they don't constantly have to go and retrieve that information all the time. So when an OTA checks for availability, it actually looks at a copy of the data that exists within their own system without having that data, without having to request the data from the initial source every single time it needs it. Smaller players, certainly on the GDSs too, will retrieve the availability as it's needed, but certainly some of the larger OTAs, have that copy, and there's benefits to it too, right? In addition to the volume, there's the benefits of having the ability to put, reporting and provide some type of marketing specifically for a consumer, right? If you go down the path of personalization, where a consumer is looking for this type of information, you can prepare that for the consumer upfront without having to pull all that information and do it on the fly. So there's a lot of benefits to it, and this is one of those things I think over the years where I've learned and become to appreciate. In the early days, I was very shopping centric, understood the benefit of having the most efficient and most accurate information, but yet there is benefits to caching. And you really need those two pieces, right? You need the first hit, which is get the information. That's where a lot of the load comes from, is city searches, what's the cheapest hotel in this area? What are the dates customers hitting, meta searches, all that stuff, pull that availability. But once you get down to the individual property level, that's where the shopping, in my mind, is the best place to go, right? You need, at least to have a pre-check prior to booking, because, again, coming from a hotel side, the most miserable experience was when we had oversells, having to walk customers, in cases where our push implementation failed for whatever reason. I remember a couple of instances where there were events in a particular city, and we had to walk not 1, not 5, not 10, but 100 people at one of our hotels, which is difficult if there's an event in the city, right? So those are the types of things that we need to kind of, again, look at both parts. The cache is important, but you need to keep the shopping in place to have the accuracy of pricing and you have the accuracy of availability.
Awesome. Jenny, anything to add to that?
I would just say that in thinking about those options, right? So what Lou is describing is a hybrid model, and that's going to maybe look different for different demand partners. But when I talk about working in a partnership, those are the kinds of conversations that are really useful to have for us to understand the demand partner's business model and what their needs are and what approach may best work for them based on our capabilities, and then those kinds of solutions that help optimize pricing, availability, accuracy, and accuracy of the cache with the balance of that kind of shopping as well.
Okay, yeah, because I think that there's been no lack of to Lou's point, white papers and ideas and suggestions, rendered shopping, and all these things that we put together as an industry. But I think that my observation is that until we get folks to really understand and play by those rules and kind of really engage and say, here's how you're going to agree to work with us, and we're going to make sure that everything is in line and working the same, we can keep having these ideas. But I think it's the implementation, and that's hopefully part of what we'd like to solve for in this pillar, is to really understand what those solutions are that are available, and then how do we actually attack those from the demand side, from a third party side, and make sure that those are kind of implemented. Our time has literally flown by. We have like 3 minutes left. I could do this all day. I have the issue of passion that Lou does. So let's just really kind of encap this to understand from you guys. I know we've touched on a little bit and maybe the answer is the same, but what is the biggest impact or thing that has happened in the industry that you believe has helped to normalize the amount of volume that has been coming through the CRS? The reason I ask this is because it gives us an idea as a committee where we can help to maybe duplicate or continue those ideas. So what have you seen as the biggest impact? Jenny, if you want to go.
Yeah, and I mean, you say that helps normalize the data coming through. There have been advances, but I will say it's been a steady march up in overall shopping volume despite that. But technology helps, right? And so with the tools today in AI and ML, with artificial intelligence and machine learning, that can be harnessed to help these demand partners with their shopping algorithms and more intelligently use the shops that they're doing to populate cache in an optimal way. We've seen some things with, speaking of the white papers, change discovery is out there, not used as widely as I think it should be. We've put something in place where we're able to detect where rooms and rates aren't necessarily being utilized by demand partners, then we can automatically suspend those and stop. This is a case of ARI versus shopping, but just sort of cutting down on the noise when things could be cleaned up. And then there's always cloud, right? And so we keep talking about adding capacity, adding more servers, but with more CRSs moving into the cloud, you've got that ability to dynamically scale. What I think is also interesting is you also have the tooling to then have more clarity on the costs driven by these specific demand partners. And I think being able to marry that better and more clear data will help us with that, that responsibility, the rules of engagement, and having more clarity in those conversations about the resources that you're using versus the value providing, and how do we get that lined up. So I think there have been things that have helped.
Amazing.
Right?
Yeah.
We will just continue to have advantages and ways to move forward and help drive this to a mutually beneficial place.
I love the cloud thing too, because that's interesting, because it also could allow us into complacency. Oh, just add more capacity. Oh, just add, but that's not the solution. We have to dial it back.
Still going to get an invoice at the end of the month.
Exactly. So I'm paying ASW. Lou, can you give us your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think Jenny's absolutely right. I would echo every single thing she said. The only other thing that I would kind of add is just adding a little bit of additional automation to how we operate with some of our partners, right? So, we've had years and years of data dumps. We've started moving towards product APIs and other things and policy, data. I think we need to get more of that. I know that, there is some of the shopping to cache requests are there to gather some of that information as well, right? You get instances where you can, whether through CDS or pushing ARI data to partners, gets them that caching information, but that misses the pieces of, creation of new rooms and rates, the missing the cancellation policies, the deposits, all of that stuff, which kind of happens almost on the fly because some of it is calculated. So those pieces, if they can be incorporated as a separate API and having more people take advantage of that, I don't think it's going to be at the same level as some of the other stuff that Jenny mentioned, but certainly every little bit helps, especially since it keeps going up every day.
Absolutely. Well, for those of you who have as much passion and interest in all of this, go to hedna.org, click on the committees, join. Again, we're kind of looking at this from a product standpoint. As you can tell from these two, there's a lot of cool things that we can actually work on. And, it's going to take all of us on the industry on both sides of the fence to really be able to put some rules of engagement together. We've got data, we've got best practices, we've got duplicate opportunities, cache and the hybrids. I mean, there's a lot of different avenues that we can really work on for the industry. So again, you guys, thank you so much for your time, for your commitment to this industry, for your passion, and just for being awesome humans. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, everyone.
Thank you, Natalie. Thank you, Jenny and Lou. That was great. It really does make us think about all the work we have to do as an industry. I'm really excited where I spent a lot of my time focusing on cache and look to book and all of those conversations. It's glad to hear that we have a pillar created with all of the years of experience to identify best practices and recommendations to the issues that you guys were discussing this morning. So thank you, that was a great session. And so now I'd like to introduce our final session of today's HEDNA at Home conference. Klaus Kohlmeier, Chief Evangelist and Development Officer at Ideas Revenue Solutions, will moderate our final session of the June HEDNA at Home. In this session, Klaus and his panelists will explore how revenue management and distribution leaders can arm their employees with the most relevant data and tools to deliver results. So thank you, Klaus, for agreeing to moderate this revenue optimization session and pulling together these great revenue and distribution leaders. I'll hand it over to you.
Thanks, Audrey. Great to see you again. And I have to shout out to Chinmay Sharma, who actually is the one who pulled all the people together. I'm just the one moderating. So appreciate it, Chin, for doing all the hard work in the back. And thanks, HEDNA, for giving us all the opportunity. We have a very diverse panel today. We have, I'm not going to do a lot of introductions, but I'm just going to mention the names and the company, and anyone who's listening can go on LinkedIn or on Google and Google all the background for the last probably 30 years of history of everyone who's on the panel. So I'll start with Vivek because he came on video first. Vivek's joining us from, I guess, Switzerland. Vivek has worked with Expedia for the last couple of years, where he looks after the Rev Plus project or product. Brian Hicks from IHG heads up commercial for the Americas. Jamie with Hilton, very involved in all things revenue management for Hilton globally. And Andrew, who's always our special guest, who comes from Delaware North, probably the least recognized company for many of us. But Delaware North is probably the funnest company because he gets to run all the national park hotels and campgrounds and a whole bunch of other stuff, including concessions and stadiums and other fun areas. So I'm really glad to have Andy as well as part of the panel, because he can provide a perspective of all the millions of people who are going to go into our national parks this year and look for all the bears and the mooses. So we'll start off. We're not going to talk about caching here. Welcome, everyone. We're going to talk about revenue management, some of the changes that have been observed, kind of what will stick around, what's temporary. We'll talk about strategy around distribution and revenue management and how they come together. And then finally, kind of the advice that we can all give as experts to the two hotels, corporate offices, hotel companies. How do we take this all forward? So let's start off with the first question. Most significant changes that have been observed as a result of the pandemic, channels, segments, customer behavior. I think the world's changed significantly in the last 15 months. Who wants to go first? Maybe we'll start with Jamie on the kind of global side, and then Brian for the Americas commercial area specifically. Jamie?
Hi, Klaus. Good afternoon. Thanks, everyone. So I would say, from the revenue management perspective, the biggest change has been how volatile forecasting is. In the past, we could always count on pretty much for hotels a repeatable, very predictable forecast, and so putting your strategies together was a lot simpler. And so I think the biggest challenge for revenue management, which in my opinion, it's been a little bit of the fun aspect, is having to figure out new ways to forecast and what forward-looking data can you incorporate, because the historical data doesn't mean much right now.
So higher volatility, shorter forecast windows. Brian, do you agree with that, or you see something different?
Yeah, absolutely. Good afternoon, Klaus. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for having me. Yeah, the last minute bookings has been probably one of the biggest impacts to that forecast, those forecast modules that are out there. Just not used to having that much demand come in within, there was a point where we were probably seeing 50% of our bookings within 3 days of arrival. That's unheard of, right? And within 7 days, it was even more out of control. I think the other big change was the amount of direct property and brand contribution. And, that was driven a lot by people just having a lot more questions about, what are the rules and regulations in your property, in your market? Can I go out for dinner? Whatever it might be. So, I'm hoping that's one of those things that might stick around for a little while, that people had a good experience when they were booking direct or talking to the hotel, and maybe they saw some benefit in doing that, and hopefully they'll come back. But I think new customers will be come through the other channels. But yeah, I'd say forecasting has been a huge one. The amount of direct business, and just obviously the major shift from being very focused on corporate and group demand, and really using that as your, that's all we talked about most of the time, right? Leisure just kind of took care of itself. You're like, yeah, they'll come on the weekends, they'll come on the holidays, everything will be fine. And now it's like, right, what are we going to do about the weekends, and what are we doing about holidays? So I think it's been for me, it's been really interesting. I've really enjoyed kind of changing that, but I'm ready to get back to normal.
I think we all are, Brian. You're not the only one.
Yeah.
Speaking about direct versus indirect, obviously I have to let Vivek kind of talk to that, since Brian has seen.
That was a jab at Vivek specifically. I know he can handle it.
Vivek, your response.
I think when I was thinking about this, I was thinking more about from how we think about behaviors changing, and what have been the overarching behaviors that we've seen across all of our partners. And we see the whole gamut, right? We see hotels, vacation rentals, and all sizes and shapes. One of the biggest things that we are seeing is that how partners deal with uncertainty, and how can we help them do that in a better, more efficient manner. And I think Jamie touched on it in terms of like forecasting could be it, but it is also about uncertainty related with restrictions, and uncertainty related with how flexibility and cancellation policies weigh in for things like that. So just thinking about coping mechanisms and confidence building measures that we can help our partners deal with that uncertainty is one thing that we've been focused on, and what we have seen through this period. Probably the only other thing that I can think of is the hunger for the ground truth. I think more than ever, one thing that we see resonating across all of our lodging and vacation rental partners is tell us what's happening in the market today, right? And give us a sense of that. Again, I think it's another, a year back, people used to keep telling us, give us some sense of the long-term forecasting. But I think all of those things are out of the window. People are more concerned about how is the market today and how is that evolving. And I think that we are seeing consistently, and we are thinking about, and we've been executing on helping our partners get a better handle on that. So those are the two things I would say kind of jump out to me.
Thanks for that, Vivek. And I do have to ask Andrew if he's in the same situation, because as far as I know, since January or February, everything's been sold out in every single national park in the US. So what's your view, Andrew? And you're mute. You paid $1 because you're the first one to be on mute.
That's the isn't that the phrase of the year, is you're on mute. We've been riding a roller coaster since this started, like everybody, and we've seen a lot of the same trends that Jamie and Brian pointed out in terms of shorter booking window. We've got higher cancellation rates as we churn through the indecisiveness of our consumer. But the biggest change we really saw early on weren't necessarily just from the customer, but internally. We and a lot of organizations like us went into survival mode early on, and our priorities suddenly shifted as everything became about cash flow. And so as you worked with the organization's leadership, it was really reevaluating all of the processes and tools and resources, and how were we driving that efficiency and that profitability. And so for us, it really helped. That was the key change. It drove a lot of the decisions that we thought perhaps were sacrificing our future to help drive that profitability and that cash flow. And to your point, Klaus, turns out we got kind of lucky. We sit in a space that's our portfolio is dominated with leisure properties and outdoor travel, and we've bounced back pretty well for this year. So
I know, Andy, we talked, I think 6-8 months ago, about a year ago, right? How you're preparing for the summer, last year's summer, and you had a pretty positive outlook just for that short period. Are you have you made any further changes to kind of your revenue management or distribution and sales strategies to prepare for this summer? And I'll have the question for Brian and Jamie afterwards too.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, we quickly came out of this having to do more with fewer people. So we were heavily dependent on some of the automation to drive our revenue management strategies. But we quickly recognized that this was going to work out somewhat in our favor. We have a long history of disasters. I can from rock slides to we've had the plague in our properties before, in national parks before. We've had hurricanes. We've dealt with all kinds of natural disasters. So we were kind of good at it. It's never worked in our favor. And in this case, people wanted to get outside. They wanted to spread out, and they couldn't get on an airplane. They couldn't fly overseas. We lost a significant amount of business in our international, but it was more than made up with the domestic. So it went well for us. And the changes we made really were tightening up the forecasting, really working with our vendor to make sure that it was accounting for the rapid changes, and they were changing month to month. It was the forecast trends we were seeing in the summer suddenly shifted in the fall, and we had to continually tweak that. But we got to, for us, we were lucky enough we could start pushing rate, especially during the summer and certain holiday seasons, and just ride that wave. So we were doing things like closing up discounts and pulling back on ad spend right now. We're just like, we don't need to be we'll keep that powder dry for the off season and stuff. So some of the changes we made in terms of cutting, the cuts we had to make, centralizing the revenue management and the marketing really helped us be more strategic in how we go to market. And so that was kind of a lesson out of some of the IHG's type, the franchise book, in terms of how can we be more strategic in that manner. So
yeah, centralization seems to be a biggest theme right now, especially with the shortage in labor all around the world, not just in the US, but I hear it from all other regions as well, which is going to have a big impact, I think, on everyone going forward. Talk a little bit to that, Jamie. What is Hilton, as much as you can talk to it, what is Hilton kind of doing in that area, and what other changes have you made to deal with the volatility and the resource constraints and everything that goes?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, a lot of what Andrew said applies to us as well, as far as, trying to look for efficiencies in revenue management, in terms of, how many hotels each revenue manager is handling. We had to push the scales, temporarily to deal with being in the middle of the pandemic. We've really leaned into automation, leveraging automated revenue management decisions, and working closely, of course, with our partner, who happens to be Ideas, to make sure that the data, is sensitive to recovery, and making sure that it's forward-looking as far as the signs that are coming. I'd say the biggest change, though, at Hilton that's been actually really nice is being very sensitive to where each area of the world is in regards to their recovery. So we still have pockets that are really suffering. Like, we have hotels in India where they're very much still in crisis mode. But then we also have hotels in Texas and Florida that, are maybe ready for advanced purchase again. So trying to be really nimble and respecting where each place in the world is in their recovery. And, it changes all the time, right? Because a new government regulation comes out, or a new strain breaks out, or a reemergence comes, and we have to be really nimble and really flexible. So, I think in the past, we've tried to kind of have regional strategies, and now sometimes it's like we go market by market with our strategies. And I think we'll probably be in that place for a while to come still.
Yeah, I had a conversation with the general manager of the Six Senses in Chengdu last week, which we issued as a podcast on Thursday, and he was saying he's never seen record ADR like he had in the last few months. So you have that, and then on the other hand, you obviously have the countries that you mentioned, right? Europe and India that are still not open. So you have like this diversification of strategies, right?
Just this week, we had a conversation about, we have these certain hotels and, they're running high occupancy. Are we sure rates being pushed hard enough? And I'm, it's so nice to have that conversation again. I welcome that conversation. So, you see a glimmer of hope, which is really nice.
Yeah. Brian, from a commercial perspective for the Americas, kind of what are you doing to take advantage of that?
Yeah, well, let me go back to, very similar experience. The one thing I would say, a learning from really reducing the team size, it was amazing how powerful we created pods, basically, of kind of revenue management teams to support groupings of hotels. And leveraging everybody's strengths in that type of a format has been a real learning experience. And I think the people that were in those pods really learned a lot as well from the others, which was great. Yet some people, that had been in the industry and had been through previous downturns or disasters, and others that were fairly new. So, a lot of great learnings for a lot of the team members, I think, came out of it. Definitely a lot of efficiencies. On the the return of some of these key markets, it is great to see some of the ADRs that are coming in places like Florida and others, and it's challenging as well at the same time. I don't think it's a surprise to anybody that as an industry, our guest satisfaction scores have fallen through the floor. We've got a long way to go to recover because we just don't have the staffing levels that we need at the hotel level. We've all experienced, having to turn away demand at a time when we're trying to make up for, the worst 18 months of our, of our industry. So that's really challenging, but I think it also sends that message, so we think about, we are looking at our systems on a regular basis, making sure that we're tweaking where we need to based on all of these demand changes. But I think just inherently as well, and I got to be careful how I say this, but people have been saving for the last 18 months. They haven't been spending. Price sensitivity is the lowest it probably will ever be in our careers. It just is a fact. I don't think I'm breaking any rules around antitrust, but people are willing to spend right now for experiences. They're willing to spend last minute, right? And so we are in revenue management. We know what that means. We know what these signals are. It's just now is the time to really try to capitalize on it. So we're seeing I don't think any key markets right now are running below 50% occupancy. I think there's some pockets, but the last couple of weeks have been really, really encouraging. Starting to see midweek come back as well, which has been awesome. So very encouraging signs coming out of last couple of weeks.
That's great. Vivek, what kind of data do you hear? Or you talked about market data, right? What kind of data are hotels looking to get in addition to what they had in the past? And how does Expedia kind of provide that data in a way that helps them understand kind of some of the trends that we've been talking about, right? Increasing demand, less price sensitivity, kind of pickups in search, and at least the shopping, right? And how do you go about helping your partners and be a good partner to the hotel community?
Yeah, we've approached it from two different aspects. One is about, I think everybody that you've heard so far, the recovery or the rebound, whatever word you might use, is staggered across markets. And so one of the things that we've been always called on to say is that how do we stack against other markets, and is our market on the right track of recovery, and where are we on that path, right? So just a sense of direction, and also a sense of where are we on that journey? Like, are we fully on the other side? Are we halfway there? and stuff like that. So one of the things that we executed this past year is looking at how do we gauge market recovery as an index and provide that to our partners so that they can get themselves a very good sense of this evolutionary metric, right? And how that is changing. And that's at the market level. The other thing I think, and this is to be seen, like if this is going to, stick or not. If I look at what we see today, I see very clearly that hotels and vacation rentals together power global lodging, right? There's just no question about it that it's either one or the other, or in markets where it's only one and no, the other one is alternative lodging. I think we all have to really seriously acknowledge that these things and consumer preferences have shown that those two are sizable and interchangeable lodging options that our travelers are looking at. Will this stay at this level of momentum with this level of intensity? Who knows? We have to see how it pans out. But as it stands, that is a clear phenomena. So how that translates to us is, how do we think about lodging and hotel demand versus vacation rental demand? And how do we see that interplay happening? And how does that impact decision making? And so I think that's the area that we are now spending a lot more time on, because we have view to both these set of demand data streams and kind of transactions as they happen in the market, to see like in which markets do we see a nice, healthy play, where is it still lopsided, and then how does that change over time? So kind of those are the two areas I would say from an insights and data standpoint that probably stand out to me.
Well, thanks for that. Andy, you've been smiling quite a bit. I don't know if you're smiling at the conversation or at Vivek.
I'm just laughing. I'm laughing because I'm missing the one of the biggest growth sectors this year was RV travel and campgrounds, and it's probably not something that's offered so much on this platform. So.
Right. Just to give a perspective to anyone who's listening, how is the campground business kind of compared to your resort or hotel business or traditional accommodation business?
It doesn't make as much money. It's low end business. It doesn't make a lot of money. I wouldn't recommend anybody focus on it. So,
but it's growing. It's growing.
It grew. I won't say it's growing.
Okay.
But it definitely grew during the pandemic.
Well, interestingly, from our perspective, just a quick kind of data point, we have about 200 campsite installations around the world, and yeah. The data that we're seeing is kind of confirming that we are seeing campgrounds being busier than
ever,
in the last few years. So you're absolutely right, Vivek, that it's not just about hotels, right? It's about any time somebody wants to stay somewhere else. Yep. There is just a much bigger multitude of options. And choice and access, because now you have the technology to be able to access all that and book it very easily as everything gets digitized and moved online, right? So that's a clear trend. Speaking about trends, so what does everyone think? What's going to be permanent? What will be temporarily? What's going to stick? What's going to go away? With one thing that I've been thinking about the last few weeks, everyone talked a lot about hybrid meetings, and I was just at a meeting in Nashville last week, and there was no hybrid whatsoever. And I know Rock in September is not going to be hybrid either. So hybrid meetings, first one that I'll throw out, is it going to be stick or non-stick? What do you think, Jamie?
I'm laughing because we tried to have a hybrid meeting recently, like an internal hybrid meeting, and between everyone, playing with the microphones and figuring out how the camera was moving around, it was quite distracting. So maybe we weren't doing it right yet. But I think that people, I'm a believer of what Brian said earlier, like people are dying to travel and get out, and I think that when people can, they will. So that's my 2 cents on that. That's my personal view, probably not Hilton's view.
Anything else that you believe that will stick or not stick other than hybrid meetings?
Yeah, I think some of the efficiencies that we found through the pandemic, will stick. The way that we leverage revenue management, the way we embrace automated decisions, I think that's going to stick. I think that we'll have to stay nimble for another year or two, because I do believe, obviously the group segment's going to come back sometime. Business travel segment, I think, will come back before the group segment. And we'll have to keep remixing our hotels. And I think while we're in this transition period, we'll have to, as revenue managers, continue to stick really closely with marketing to make sure we're talking to the right audiences that are actually viable to come into our markets. So I think that closer partnership with marketing is here for the long haul, which is a good thing. We've always said we want to do that, but now we're forced to do it. And I think that'll be a good outcome of all this.
Thanks. Brian, hybrid meetings, hot or not?
I think they will be hot from a international standpoint. So we've got, even internally, looking at having some meetings where we will have our European counterparts in London, US colleagues maybe in New York or DC, and having a hybrid meeting that truly is presentation hybrid, not necessarily interaction hybrid. So let's say you want to have breakouts, you wouldn't do that virtually. You would have your main content be displayed, as a hybrid event, and then you'd go off into your separate groups and have, side meetings and things like that. So that actually, I think, until we see, for 2 points. Number one, we still have various countries in various stages of recovery, and you never know when you're going to get an outbreak again and restrictions come back down. And number two, travel budgets, right? I mean, everybody's basically eliminated, for the most part, international travel budgets, with a few exceptions of some of the big players. But domestic travel is back for the most part. Very just individual corporate travelers, not groups, not big meetings or anything like that. But I think as you start to see corporations understanding that there's a huge amount of savings, especially in international travel, that you'll see more of those types of hybrid events. So in the domestic hybrid, I agree with pretty much everybody else. They just don't work, right? I mean, somebody's always missing out, especially if somebody's trying to interject or provide some insights or what have you. Recording and replaying, that's probably something that might still work, but for the most part, I think it's. I just look, if it was going to be a thing, it probably would have happened 10 years ago, right?
And we want these business travelers in our hotels, right?
Exactly.
We do, and actually that experience last week, it was about 100 people conference. It was all face to face, no hybrid. Very, very interesting experience. So it's a good kind of. I agree with you. Everyone wants to come back and go travel again, right? And see each other face to face, hang out in the bar and in the restaurant, and just network, right? Andy, what I don't know, what do you think? Hybrid meetings or anything else that will stick or not stick?
Yeah, I guess I believe that if there was a trend before the crisis and it was amplified by the crisis, it'll stick. And if there was a situation where the crisis turned the other direction, I believe that over time it'll reset back to the way it was before the crisis. And in our case, a couple of for hybrid travel, hybrid meetings, I think Brian hit it right on the head. There was a trend already occurring where people were starting to in presentation mode a hybrid model, but not necessarily participation mode. I don't think I think that's the way it'll go back in that sense. I think there'll be more and more of that presentation mode in terms of people signing. I can see people signing up to. I can see myself signing up to a conference that I may have never gone to before if I can just watch the presentations. For us, some other trends. I'll give two examples of where it's going in both directions. So I mentioned campgrounds. RV sales were trending down until the pandemic, and they spiked last year. And I don't think that's sustainable. I think over time there'll be a lot of used RVs on the market. Whereas vacation rentals, Airbnb and VRBO and things like that, those were definitely trending up. They shot up during last summer and this summer as well. So that's not going away, and I think that's something that we all have to consider as we come out of this crisis.
I could ask everyone if anyone got a COVID pet during the last 12 months, and if that's going to stick or not too. But let's not go there. Yeah. You did, Brian? Oh, Vivek too. All right. We'll talk in 12 months. Vivek, from your perspective, obviously a massive global company. I know you have people that that you work with in your team that are spread all around the world. What do you have to add?
I don't think I have anything specific to add to what everybody has said. I think we all are trying to figure out, and I think it's a human tendency that when something gets taken away without choice or without your say in it, you yearn to try to get back to some version of it, what is allowed and what is permissible, right? And so I think there is definitely a yearning for more immersive experiences and more interaction and kind of face-to-face. But I think it'll be interesting to see. I mean, even like large companies like ours, there's always, in most companies, there are different kinds of subculture around travel and expenses, right? And all of those fundamental assumptions and kind of subcultures have been reset. And I think trying to get back to some sense of, okay, that's what we used to do earlier is not going to fly. I think the bar to trying to do like offsites and trying to do, large team meetings is high. And it's going to be for some time till the vaccination settles on, because I think it's more of a kind of employee and team member health kind of point of view first, which should be, right? And so I think there is that. Once we get over that, I think then the real question comes. Everybody has digital passports. Everybody has, has been vaccinated. The countries are not enforcing quarantine. Then the real question comes that now that everything is settled and it seems like we're not having any more outbreaks or infection rates are in control, will then teams choose to travel and try to get together in person to do that, even if the frequency is less? I think it's to be determined. I think that probably is the thing, because I don't think anybody is really tackling that right now, given the kind of, if you think about global companies like us, we still have a lot of markets where our employees are still not back in the offices, and it's not recommended to do so by local law. So why would we make them travel and expect to attend meetings? So.
Right. Well, in the future, we could just meet in all the empty RVs that are going to be used. They're going to be on the used RV market. So we just gather in there. Last question.
There's a business model there to connect RVs and put them on the grid.
Actually, it's already in the US. You can, like an RV share. I think it's called rvshare.com or something like that. We'll see more of that, I'm sure. Last question for everyone, quickly. I think we have about 45 seconds for each, or about a minute. The one piece of advice you would give a revenue manager, a revenue leader, commercial leader in the hotel world, what should they be focusing on? How do you take advantage of what's to come? Jamie, ladies first.
Okay, I think the advice I would give is, I think everyone has worked really hard. It's been a really tough last year, and just trying to generate some enthusiasm and excitement about capitalizing on recovery. This is our time to shine. This is revenue management's chance to really make an impact on the business and demonstrate great value, as recovery comes back. And so I think it's an exciting time to be a revenue manager. It's always been an exciting time, but it's extra exciting right now.
Absolutely. Andrew, you want to go next? Andy, sorry.
Sure. I'd say top of the list for me, it's just, a lesson learned is be adaptable. Don't cling to dogma or doctrine, especially during these times of upheaval. We've seen cases where we had a resort that was suffering, as many properties did, of finding labor, finding housekeepers, finding people to clean rooms, and there's nothing worse than turning away demand for that. So we went in at this property and did the unconventional, just put in a blanket multi-night length of stay, regardless of what the system was saying, just to drive the housekeeping efficiency, because it was better to at least get 2 nights than to have to turn business away because we couldn't handle it. And we thought we were giving up all those 1-night stays, and this property ended up surprising us. We got for every 2 1-night stays we gave up, suddenly our 2-night stays increased by that amount, and we were like, people actually just changed their mind just because they wanted to go to this destination. Then we thought, okay, let's try this elsewhere, because this was an experiment we didn't know. It didn't work everywhere, and that's okay. But it was just a sign that just just be adaptable, try new things, experiment. Don't cling to dogma because you just can't during a time of crisis.
Brilliant, a great example. Thanks, Vivek, and then we'll close off with Brian.
I think there's an opportunity to restate the mission of what the team is responsible for and what the remit is, because there's been a reset. And I think how you collaborate with other colleagues cross-functionally to drive commercial outcomes. I think there's a clear need to do that. And the only other thing I would say is that there's an opportunity to bring back confidence into data-driven decision-making. And that happens incrementally, one day at a time. And I think if I know revenue managers have been around them enough that they're up for the challenge. And I think this is the time to step up and do it.
Brilliant. And Brian?
Yeah, I think my best advice is to stay granular, right? You know, in the very beginning, I was looking at daily occupancy and daily booking trends, which I hadn't done since I was on property, or even at a smaller group of hotels where you'd be looking at it on a daily basis. But the learnings, through that process of understanding these small, minute changes in the way segments have been reacting and consumer behavior, et cetera, I think it's really powerful to continue to try to watch that granular changes so that we're prepared, right? Be prepared, be on the front foot. Don't wait, to let the see that your corporate is coming back and then make changes. Or I think Jamie said it earlier, what markets do we need to bring back stricter policies and rules around our rate products? Get granular in the data. You'll know when that time is coming and you won't be left behind.
That's great. A great closing statement here. So be flexible, be passionate, look at your data, be more granular, and be excited about being a revenue manager. Thank you. Thanks everyone for your time, and thanks for your insights and inputs. We'll see you in an RV with your COVID pets very soon.
Thanks,
and I'll
Klaus.
pass it back over to Audrey. Thank you.
Thank you.
And Audrey's on mute too.
I did it too, the muting. Oh, the muting. Thank you, Klaus. So thanks everyone. Thank you, Klaus, and thanks to the Revenue Systems Pillar session and to our incredible panelists. That was very valuable information. Definitely from a lot of the sessions today, realizing that we have to look at data differently than we have in the past and get very granular. So it's fewer people looking at a lot more data. So we have a lot of work to do, but I know this industry can do it. So our time is up and our sessions have concluded for the day. But I did want to say a big thank you to the HEDNA Board of Directors and from the HEDNA at Home conference chairs, which are Mike Carlo, Chinmay Sharma, and myself. We'd like to thank everyone for joining today's sessions. And a big, huge thank you to our keynote speaker, Cindy Estes Green, today's moderators, Chinmay, Sandra, Natalie, and Klaus, and to all of our wonderful panelists. Your engagement and involvement is greatly appreciated. And finally, a big thank you to Ewald Group for helping us organize our event and all of our events. We are incredibly excited to welcome you all to Miami in October for our first face-to-face this year. The team is working really hard and we promise to deliver an amazing event to you. Registration went out just a little bit ago. I saw it come in on my work laptop. So make sure you link on it, register, and get out there and travel, everyone. Thank you so much.